Welcome to this meeting, everyone. I do apologise that we're a little bit behind time. We've had a few technical issues, which I do hope are sorted now. Welcome to it, but before we go any further, I'd like you all to observe a minute's silence for one of our colleagues who sadly passed away last week, Councillor Bill Davis. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Okay. So next I'd like to ask Phil McCourt to do a roll call of our members, please. Could you all put your cameras on when you're confirming that you're present here tonight? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Cllr Anderson.
Present.
Cllr Carubia.
Good evening. Present, thank you.
Cllr Cleary.
I'm present. Good evening.
Cllr Clements.
Good evening, Councillor Clements present.
Cllr Gilchrist.
Good evening, Councillor Phil Gilchrist present, thank you.
Cllr Green.
Good evening, Councillor Jeff Green present.
Cllr Gray.
Councillor Gray present.
Cllr Hodson.
Councillor Hodson present.
Cllr Leech.
Councillor Anita Leech present.
Cllr McManus.
Councillor McManus present.
Cllr McLaughlin.
Councillor McLaughlin present.
Cllr Nolan.
Councillor Nolan present.
Cllr Rennie.
Councillor Lesley Rennie present.
Cllr Spriggs.
Councillor Christine Spriggs present. Good evening.
Cllr Stuart.
Councillor Paul Stuart present.
Cllr Usher.
Cllr Usher present.
And of course Cllr Williamson.
Councillor Williamson present.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just to continue the theme of IT failure, my Surface Pro has now frozen, so I can't actually scroll down on anything I have in front of me. This is the disadvantage of not having paper versions of things. So I would be grateful if someone could, if Steve or Phil, could you confirm the next item on the agenda is apologies? And if so, could people tell me whether they've had any?
Thank you, Chair. The next item is apologies. None have been received and all members are present.
Thank you.
It's then
it is
corrections of interest.
Yes. Okay. So I just invite members to declare any pecuniary interest they might have in any of the agenda items up for discussion tonight. Thanks.
It's Councillor Lesley Rennie, Councillor Williamson. A non-pecuniary interest in the item, the sale of land at Arrowe Park Road in Upton. Just as a member of Merseyside Fire and Rescue Authority, I understand that the site that we're talking about tonight is council-owned, but clearly the fire station next to it has previously been sold. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Again, just in terms of transparency, on agenda item 6, people may know that I was a former director of Magenta Living, which has a joint company with Taurus, who are listed in that report. It's quite a tenuous link, but just for the sake of transparency, those matters will not impede on my judgment of what we do with that piece of land. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I really apologise for this. I'm unable to switch between screens. There we go. And I need to put my camera back on as well. It's not working. Great. Okay, is that all right, everyone? I'm so sorry about this. We're all having problems tonight. So we're up to agenda item number 4, public and member questions. I haven't been notified of any public questions, so that will take me to 4B. I have been notified of 2 statements that members of public wish to present to me. I can only apologise in advance that I have not got the names of those particular residents in front of me because of my my problems with my Surface Pro. Phil, could you tell me who they are, please?
Chair, you have a Mr. Robert Earl first, and then a Mr. Paul Howard.
Thank you. Mr. Earl, would you like to give us your statement? Thanks a lot.
Chair, there is somebody waiting in the lobby. He's listed as anonymous, so that's why I've been reluctant to let him in, but I'm assuming it is the gentleman who wants to make a statement. I could perhaps let them in.
Do we have any members of the public in at the moment that are listed to make a statement?
Yes, we've got Paul and Julie Brownbill.
Okay, so
Watson.
I only have 2 names in front of me that are going to be making a statement tonight. Am I incorrect in thinking that?
Yes, Chair, you only have a Mr. Robert Earl and
Yeah.
then a Mr. Paul Howard. So on the presumption that one of those gentlemen is anonymous,
Yeah.
we could let them in.
Yes.
Okay, I shall let them in now. Okay.
Thank you.
Hi there.
Hello.
Could you confirm your name?
Yes, it's Paul Howard.
Okay.
Hi, Mr. Harrod. Welcome to the meeting. You're free to speak. You have 3 minutes to make your statements. So if you're happy to start, that'd be good. Thank you.
Right, I'd just like to make a brief point about the traffic in my area. I live on Manor Drive, and the traffic at peak times around the Upton Island is appalling, to put it lightly. And what happens is, if the traffic's bad there, every Tom Cobbler suddenly decides, I know, we'll use Manor Drive as a rat run. If you increase the traffic around that little roundabout, at Upton, it's going to make the traffic down Manor Drive a lot worse. And as well as there's no necessity for another shop in Upton. I know the council obviously want to get the money from the sale of the land, but I think it'd be detrimental towards Upton Village and the shops there already for another shop that, quite frankly, we don't need. And as I say, the increased traffic. Also, if ambulances are trying to get through there at peak times, it's going to be awful. You're going to have people passing away in the ambulance before they manage to get to the hospital. And that's just my point about it.
Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. Do we have our second speaker in the room now as well? Does someone confirm that we've also got our second speaker in here?
There's a Tim Watson in the lobby. Would you like me to admit him? I believe he speaks of the Upton residents.
We don't have him listed to speak. I mean, I don't know. I've only had 2 residents listed to speak, so I'd have to defer to Phil McCourt here on this one.
Chair, the ability to speak is open to people who've let the council know in advance that they wish to speak on the item they're wishing to speak about. So unless the people who are asking to come in are the computer names for Mr. Earl rather than Mr. Earl himself, then that's fine, otherwise not.
Okay. I think that answers that one then, really. We just have another speaker, which is Mr. Earl. Mr. Earl, are you here? Are you ready to speak?
It seems not, Chair. So.
Okay.
Hello, it's Mr.
Oh,
Brownville.
okay.
And
Okay,
although
so
I'm
sorry,
not
I need to come in. I think we had Mr. Earl down to speak here. Are you Mr. Earl?
No.
Okay, no. Okay, well, I do apologise, but the only names I've been given, the only other speaker I have, to my knowledge, to speak tonight is Mr. Earl, who's given advance notice.
I have the email from Phil McCourt confirming my right to speak, and I also submitted a statement to all committee members.
Phil?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I believe Mr. Mumble contacted Steve, Mr. Fox, and put forward a statement and asked for it to be forwarded in writing. So we understood that was in writing, and he didn't wish to speak. But if that's the case, he had given notice, and therefore you may wish to allow him to have his 3 minutes.
That's fine. Okay, that's fine. Mr. Brownville, was it? Yeah, that's fine if you want to proceed.
Yeah, so just to complicate matters, it was actually Tim Watson who was going to speak on behalf of the people I represented.
Okay, I do apologise because I'm going to have to go back to Phil McCourt on this. Have we had any advance notice from Mr. Watson around speaking tonight?
Unless any of Democratic Services can say otherwise, Chair, then no.
He was copied in as a signatory to my statement, he was copied in with the invite to. He's also signed in as a guest tonight.
Phil?
Chair, this is a matter for your discretion this evening, as this is the first time. But
Okay.
no, we're not aware of a Mr. Watson asking to speak.
Okay, well, I think given Mr. Watson does want to speak and there's been some advance notification, albeit I do accept not from Mr. Watson, but you did accept Mr. Brownville could. I think we will just allow Mr. Watson his 3 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, just before you start speaking, I do see a hand up from Cllr Anderson.
Chair, yeah, I'm always in favour of involving members of the public, but since this procedure hasn't been followed, Mr. Watson is indeed a Labour Party candidate for the local elections next year. I don't think this is appropriate at this time with no indication.
Okay. Phil?
Chair, this is as I say, this is a matter for your discretion at the moment. Mr. Brownville
I can't read it. No.
Mr. had said in advance, but we understood he was going to rely on a written statement. Mr. Watson was CC'd into his emails, but that's all. So, as I say, it's a matter for your discretion now.
Okay. Councillor Green?
Yeah, I mean, I understand Tom's point, and I'm sure the entire committee is getting a bit frustrated in terms of the advice that you have been given. I mean, my sense now is let's let the gentleman speak, give him his 3 minutes, and then crack on, really.
Yeah. Okay. I don't see any other hands up. I'm going to take that as...
So I just popped my
sorry,
hand.
I just seen yours. Yeah, Councillor Gilchrist.
Thanks very much. My view is that there are a number of residents who did circulate material by email to us, and as they had given us notice that way, we should let a spokesman speak to us. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't actually see any more hands up now, and I agree with the last two comments made by Councillor Green and Councillor Gilchrist. So I will just allow Mr. Watson to speak. Mr. Watson, you can come in now. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, Janette. Thanks for that. Lots of fun tonight. Okay. I'd like to speak against the sale of this public open green space in Upton. The first thing I'd like to say is that there's no need for another supermarket in this area. There are already 6 within a few miles, and you can't consider the sale, but I don't think you consider the sale separately to what we know it will be used for, what the land will be used for. Lidl's plans are clear. In fact, the sale of the land is subject to getting planning permission for the supermarket. So it's all tied in together. These plans go against the community wealth building strategy that the council supports. Lidl wants to extract as much money from Wirral as it can at the cost of our local shops and businesses. These businesses are struggling, and this discount supermarket could see many close with loss of jobs, loss of locally generated and retained income and business rates for the council. Building this new supermarket does not create more shoppers with more money. It only moves them around and encourages driving over walking. Residents have worked hard to improve the area in Upton, and local traders have provided a great service during the pandemic. Allowing this sale to go ahead would be a slap in the face for them when they really deserve our thanks. The land provides local amenity and acts as a natural buffer to traffic pollution and noise. The roundabout and roads next to the site do not cope now with the existing traffic to the retail park. The traffic often grinds to a halt with long queues building up the approach roads, particularly on the bypass. This has gotten worse since the houses were built at Upton Pines, and there are more to come with over 100 planned for the Champion site just down the road. Now, the council declared a climate emergency last year, and we all know we need more trees and less cars. So this sale will not help us deal with climate change. It will only make things worse. According to the report, however, the environmental impact appears minimal, and yet this sale will facilitate construction on green space, removal of trees, and encourage more car travel. Now, we know this is all about the money, and I'm well aware of how this government has slashed the council fundings. I know this money is needed, but the sale and the development will bring more traffic pollution, leading to more ill health for residents. It will only make the health inequalities we see between East and West Wirral worse. And there are other ways the council can raise money that would cause less harm. This seems like a short-term fix that will be bad in the long term. There are possible financial risks and hidden costs here that appear to be downplayed or ignored. There may be legal costs associated with a planning appeal, and there may be a need for roadworks or improvements to the Frankby Drain. Yet there is no Section 106 agreement. Despite these risks, the proceeds of the sale are already in this year's budget, and yet the decision to sell is only supposed to be made today. I urge all committee members to vote against these plans. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Mr. Watson, and thank you for keeping to the time limits. I'm not aware of anyone else, any other public statements, and so I thank both contributors for that, and we'll move on to the next agenda item. Do bear with me, I'm now having to check my phone to get the paperwork up. So our next agenda item is questions by members, and I don't think there are any. So what I propose that we do is a slight change in the agenda. Given that our members of public are here tonight, several are here for the specific agenda item around the sale of land in Arrowe Park, and with members' consent, I think we should move that up to the top of the agenda and debate that first. If that's okay with everyone, can I, if anyone doesn't agree with that, could they let me know? If not, I think we could proceed on to agenda item number 7 and talk about that. I don't see any objections. Yeah, Councillor Carubia.
Sorry, Chair. I think you need to do. You need to put in. Bear with me. You haven't done any petitions.
Correct. Do apologise. I haven't, have I? So, are there any petitions that members would like to present tonight? No. Okay. Thanks for that, Councillor Carubia. You're right. I did miss that item out. I'm sorry. So just to go back to what I said there, then, if there's no objections to us moving agenda item 7 up to the top of the agenda to allow our residents to, obviously, you know, if they don't want to hang around for the rest of this meeting, they can go after this has been discussed. Is that okay with everyone? All right then. Thank you. I'll take that as a yes. I'd just like to now ask the officer to come along and speak to the report, please. Is that you, David?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it is.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just put the camera on. David Armstrong, the Assistant Chief Executive. Thank you, Chair. It's interesting to hear to the two speakers who've given their views. I think I need to say at the beginning that this report is only about the sale of the land. It doesn't involve itself in anything to do with the planning process, which would cover such issues as highways and drainage and the other matters that have been raised. So it isn't a case of trying to deflect them away. It's just that this report is solely about the sale of the land. The council agreed to sell the land in October 2019 under the previous cabinet system. This matter has had to come back to you because of a discrepancy in the plan, and the plans are shown in the appendix, in that the council and Lidl were working to slightly different plans, and that only came to light in fairly recently. In that there's a small triangle of land included in the Lidl drawing and included in their offer for the site, which wasn't included on the red line drawing that the council officer was using. The council value was using. So it's had to come back to you for a further approval for that small triangle of land to be included. The officer recommendation in October 2019 was to agree this sale, and that remains the case. It's felt to be a measured disposal set against the overall scheme. The overall scheme has merit in the view of officers in terms of its match to the council's plans and intentions for regeneration and business development. I understand these stores create in the region of 25 to 30 jobs. It would also produce a very significant sum in terms of annual business rates, which would be able to be used to fund council services. The two little stores, the one in Leeshow and the one in Birkenhead, produce 162,000 and 249,000 per year in business rates. And at the time when officers are charged with trying to increase income to maintain services, and particularly more so challenged at the moment, that those figures are significant. It also allows the redevelopment of the fire station site, which landlocks the site in question, and it actually allows that to be developed rather than left as it is. This was unusual in that we have been trying to release surplus assets for some time to generate revenue to bolster the council's budget, but this was unusual in that this was an approach from Lidl, who have purchased, we understand, the fire station site and the two houses that were on there. The houses were built originally as part of the fire station site, but at some time they'd been sold off by the fire service. So that effectively landlocks the site in question, which belongs to the council, and that's the reason why we see it as having only a very nominal value apart from this offer of £820,000 for the site. Just also to be clear, because I've read the correspondence which has come in the last week, there's a suggestion that clearly the council is the planning authority as well. I would stress that the council's valuers, two valuers have been involved in this process, one of whom has taken retirement on ill health, but the remaining valuer, neither of them had any involvement whatever with Lidl or the planning process or the pre-planning advice discussions that they've had with the planners. They have been totally separate from that. So they are two completely different processes. As I say, the sale of the land has already been approved. There are a number of issues to do with planning, which will need to be taken through the planning process, some of which have been mentioned tonight, and some of which are mentioned in the correspondence, which has kindly been shared with me. There are also issues about third-party rights. There are some residual standard clauses from 2005 when the council's housing stock was transferred to Magenta, and there's also an issue to do with the redirection of a footpath, and there's also an issue to do with this currently being designated public open space. So in addition to the planning process, there are three other processes that would need to be gone through, and the agreement to the sale of the land does not detract or diminish or dilute any of those processes. So it isn't to, as I said at the beginning, it isn't to seek to deflect those concerns. It's that they're just not the concern of this report. So this report is put forward to you again for recommendation with that change to the land in question, which is the triangle of land shown in the appendices. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that, David. Yeah, and just to reiterate, to clarify that this is nothing to do with planning. This is solely about the decision around selling that piece of land in Upton. So I can see, did I see a member's hand up prior? We're going to open this up now to a discussion. So I'd appreciate if people who want to take part, put their hands up. I can see one currently. No, a few are coming up. So what I'll do is I will take people individually for now. If it becomes a bit onerous, we can take people in threes. But I'm going to take Councillor Gray first. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've expressed very strong views publicly about this, which I feel could be seen as predetermination. And so I'm going to excuse myself from the debate and from this vote. Thank you.
Councillor Williamson, you're muted.
Sorry.
Still muted.
There we go. These things were sent to test us, weren't they? Thanks for that, Councillor Gray. Councillor Phil McCourt, could you give us a legal view on that, please, as regards to what constitutes predetermination on this?
So, Chair, apparent predetermination is where a member has made statements in such a way that it could be used as evidence in court to say that councillor had fettered their discretion. They could no longer come at this matter with an open mind, and indeed their mind is closed to the issue. So they've become a campaigner as opposed to a determinant of the question before you. So it's more than just a predisposition in that somebody has a strong view about something. It's gone beyond that to a point where that member has effectively said this is how they will vote.
Okay, thanks for the clarification on that. I can see, I think the next hand that came up was Councillor Carubia.
Thanks, Chair. Okay, I've got a couple of questions really. I just wanted some clarification on this. Looking at point 3 on the background information, it says the company's already purchased the neighbouring fire station, 2 semi-detached houses, etc., etc., and this was done in October 2019. So I'm wondering why only now they took, and it's not really a small triangle of land. It looks about the same size as the piece they've already bought. So I'm just trying to understand why they didn't buy the whole piece in one go, and why they bought the land that they've already got, and is this an extra piece of land that they want? Because it doesn't seem to be very clear in the detail of whether this is an afterthought by them or us, and I don't understand why Lidl and the council were working on 2 different maps, because these 2 pieces of land, the one shaded in pink and grey, which is what they already own, I assume, and the one that is edged in red look about the same size to me. So I'm very confused as to why they'd buy one lot and not the other. Could we have some clarification on that, please?
Through you, Chair, if I take you to the appendix, the red shaded area is the former fire station site, which was never owned by the council. That was owned by the fire service. And the blue shaded area are the 2 houses that I referred to, which were built at the same time as the fire station was built. I guess it dates back to the same era as when we had school caretakers living on school sites. Some fire service staff probably lived on the site. At some point, those houses were sold off, I think, to fire service personnel and privately owned. And Lidl have bought the red shaded area from the fire service, and they've bought the blue shaded areas from the 2 householders. The piece of land that the council agreed to sell last October is the piece which is plain white with the red line round it. And the variation is the triangle of land to the right of that piece of land. There's a triangle of land which isn't included in the first red line drawing, but is included in the second. And you're right, it was a straightforward error that the 2 parties were using different land. So if you look at the 2 plans together, you can see that triangle of land to the right, which it currently has a footpath going at the boundary of it, which would have to be redirected around it. So that's the difference. It's that small area to the right. the original agreement from last October is the red line drawing the first the appendix. Thank you.
Could I have a supplementary, if I may, Chair? That size piece of land, then, that corner that we're talking about, David, is probably about the size of how many car parking spaces? And looking at the map on page 37, it looks like about, what, four car spaces, 5 car spaces?
When this first came to light, through you, Chair, the only involvement I've had was to say that that because we had agreement to sell the land, could Lidl proceed with their development without that piece of land? Yep. And could they go and have some pre-application discussion with the planners, which is perfectly normal for developers. And they went and had that, and the message I got back was that they did need that for the car parking spaces that would be needed for the size of the store. So that's why it's been brought back to you. The other thing was that because of comments that were made under the previous system, the cabinet system, about landscaping, that although we couldn't require it, it'll be a planning requirement, we strongly suggested that they might want to have an enhanced landscaping buffer between the car park and the aspects facing the roundabout. So that's another reason why they would probably need this extra space. They've said that without that extra triangle, after discussion, pre-consultation discussion with the planners, they need that to make the scheme work.
Thank you. I'm just going to go in the order. I think hands went up, and I do apologise now if someone put theirs up before someone else. I have Councillor Gilchrist, then Councillor Stuart, then Councillor Green, and Councillor Nolan. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair. I have pored over the plans, and I was not familiar with this site. I've probably driven past it many times on the way to hospital, but never till recently studied it in this detail. It looks to me as though a decision was taken about the bulk of the site and the original red area land, red-lined land, in October 2019. So I'm not too sure. We can take some advice on whether that binds the council in some way. But thinking about this as how it would appear to whenever any development takes place in the area, I imagined myself cycling or driving down the road and seeing what would I see. So I'd see a Lidl store with some modest landscaping in front of it based on the plan we have. I don't want to stray into planning issues. My counting up of the spaces that's on this site that might be lost or not lost might be about 9 or 10. But what I'm interested in is how the area would look when it's completed, and whether this extra bit of land, which is public open space, the small triangle, which was a temptation just to write it off, what contribution that would actually make to the area. Now, I'm not in favour of having an urban jungle. I don't want to go into planning issues, but the whole area just looks like any town with any standard landscaping that you would get from developers. And it would merely, I don't think the issues about Upton Village and shops are matters that we can go into detail, because I think there would be a planning consideration about what impact there would be on the village. So I'd expect some proper study of that at the time of planning. But I'm reluctant to part with this extra triangle, because I think it makes, despite what Mr. Armstrong has told us about the scheme, it makes the area so urban and standard that as to be uninspiring if I were on planning. But I am interested in the points that a resident raised about landscaping and natural buffer I wrote down. So I think those are considerations that would suggest to me that we simply go back to Lidl and say, yes, well, our opinion is that you can make it work, redesign it a little bit, and you don't have to have this extra bit, which I see as important for landscaping. Thank you, Chair.
Through you, Chair, yeah, I accept those comments, Councillor Gilchrist. Clearly, that's what I referred to earlier. When I was presented with this as an issue, that was my first port of call, was to see whether the scheme could be developed without that triangle. And the message I got back was, after I wasn't party to the discussion, as I said earlier, nor were the valuers, nor was anybody who's dealing with the sale of the land. We weren't party to any discussion with the planners, but the message back was that the scheme needed that piece of land to work. as I said earlier, the only other comment I made in the one meeting that I've been involved in was that, taking comments from last year, there was a desire to see some enhanced landscape buffering between the car park and the aspects of the roundabout. And again, I don't wish to stray into planning matters either, but the response I got was that the additional landscaping buffer shown on the plan was the response to that. But as I say, that was not part of the planning process, and I don't wish to go into that. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before I bring in Councillor Stuart and then Councillor Green, I know that we have a ward councillor here who wishes to speak. In what order would I take that, Phil, please?
Chair, you would normally invite the ward member to speak right at the beginning of the item before members began their questions and debate. But I realise Councillor Robinson has only just joined.
Okay.
Obviously, allowing her to speak is entirely a matter for your discretion.
Of course,
Yeah.
If committee are fine with this, then I'll bring her in now. Thank you. Councillor Robinson, would you like to speak?
Yes, please, you don't mind. I'd like to say thank you, Janette, for letting me speak this evening. I'd like to speak, obviously, on the sale of the land, and I know there's been some, very legitimate comments made. Residents and also traders have been in touch with myself as a local ward councillor, obviously objecting. I've also got a handed petition from the traders, who we've also had as high street heroes in this current situation. They've asked me would I speak against the sale of the land to the committee. I understand that obviously we're in unprecedented times and budget, obviously we've got massive budget restrictions going on. However, David obviously alluded before that obviously some of the things that have been mentioned, which are very important to people at the traffic, obviously the businesses in the high street, the fact that all the development that's been going on locally, the Upton Pines, the traffic, anyone that actually goes around that roundabout will know exactly what we're talking about with the traffic. There's another development up the road that's about to be done. 100 more properties coming off of the old Champions site, not least obviously drainage, pollution. However, what I'd like to do, because I say a lot of people have said these are planning considerations, I'd like to obviously reference the report if I may. The report obviously says that this is listed as obviously a public open space. So what I've done is I've looked at legislation regarding this, because again, tonight's decision is based on selling of the public open land. So I'd like to just reiterate the fact is under Section 10 of the Open Space Act of 1906, that this provides a local authority that has acquired control over an open space to which the 1906 Act applies, shall, subject to certain conditions, hold and administer the open space in trust to allow the enjoyment of it by the public as an open space and for no other purpose. In times of increasing cuts to public funding, alternative methods of raising funds to provide services to local inhabitants are being considered by local authorities. Some local authorities may be considering disposing of land or premises owned by them in order to generate income. However, local authorities considering taking such steps need to ensure that their actions are compliant with legislation that seeks to ensure that open spaces are kept available for public use, and local authorities should be aware that disposal of such land may be held unlawful if the effect is to exclude the public from those areas, i.e. held on trust for the use and enjoyment of all local inhabitants. If I may, I'd like to go on to Section 123 of the Local Government Act, which is also mentioned in the report. This provides that the council may dispose of land held by it in any manner it wishes, subject to certain conditions. I also like to add that I don't agree that an asset, obviously that size, is not worth anything, as the value is put in the report. It's nil value, it says. However, there is a need for the authority, when exercising the power under Section 122 of the 1972 Act, to be satisfied that the land is no longer required for the purpose which it is held. So obviously I'd like to mention those two at least. There's at least 5 legislations that potentially this open public space it comes under. There is also mentioned at least 6 in the actual document. It goes against our own policies as a local authority. I've found at least another 4. So this is 10 policies. What I'd like to say to committee is we've made a commitment, and whilst I understand the budget restraints, that we have a local, a national and a global environmental, and also we have obviously environment and climate emergency. So when do we start saying no? When do we actually start saying no to selling public open spaces, and actually sort of, for whatever the reasons, for 98 cars to park on it? So I'd just like to leave that thought with the members and say that obviously, and thank you very much for your time this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Robinson. David, would you like to come in after that? I think you ought to, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks for those comments. Yeah, I just go back to what I said at the beginning, which is that this report is solely concerned with the sale of the land. It doesn't seek to bypass or shortcut any legal processes, and there's just been outlined there are a whole range of legislation that would apply to this disposal in addition to the planning application to do with the public open space. So there are, the issues I listed earlier, the public open space, the footpath issue and the third party rights issue, they would all have to be dealt with. The valuers that worked on this, clearly they have professional qualifications and they have their professional membership to uphold, and they're satisfied that in terms of meeting the requirements for the value of the site, that they are met. The price is approximately £1 million per acre, I understand, and as I said, the site is landlocked without that. So in terms of that one, they're satisfied. But no, the Councillor Robinson is right. There's a whole raft of legislation which would have to be worked through separate to the decision which has already been made to sell the land, except for the triangle that I've referred to. Thank you.
So I'm just going to come in, sorry, as chair there, David. So could you confirm that what Councillor Robinson has just presented tonight, given that you've just said that would need to be clarified, is that an impediment at this stage?
No, I don't see it as an impediment, and clearly I'm not the specialist valuer or the specialist lawyer. All I know is that the council does make disposals subject to planning permission and subject to other matters being dealt with, for example, aspects of public open space legislation, aspects where we need to divert a footpath or whatever. It's not unique and it's not unusual. It's just a reassurance that I'm giving that the agreement to sell the land does not bypass any of what Councillor Robinson set out. Those processes would have to be worked through. The third party right issue with Magenta is not one I've not come across before, but it's one that Lidl are prepared to underwrite because it's highly unlikely that there would be any claim against that. The footpath issue, there's a process for that which would need to be gone through. The public open space, there's a process for that would have to be gone through, which has just been outlined, and the process for the planning permission would have to be gone through as normal, which would cover some of the issues which some residents have written about in the recent week, for example, the traffic and the drainage. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Going back to members' questions and comments, I've got Councillor Green, Councillor Stuart and Councillor Nolan's hands up. So Councillor Green.
Thank you, Janette. I wasn't intending to speak on this particular item, but from what I can tell at the moment, this land isn't greenbelt. It's likely to bring in £820,000, I think. And again, as I understand it, because this was happening in the run-up as we came to the committee system, that funding has been assumed, and I believe now that we are able to use capital to support the revenue budget if it's one-off and in certain circumstances and so on. So that resource has been identified, and if we don't go through with it this evening, then that could create a problem within the budget. The other thing which I think is important is it was identified that it will probably develop 25 to 30 full-time equivalent jobs. And thinking back to one of the objectives of the council in terms of regeneration and employment and so on, I think all of that is important and needs to be factored into our decision. I suppose, again, I've been down and had a look at the site and so on, and I can understand why there is a lot of local affection for that particular site. I was particularly in terms of what Jean had to say. However, I think it would probably, I think one of the things that is quite frustrating, or can be, that local residents, councillors and so on can see assets being sold, if you will, and I know there's an issue about whether it's an asset because of its value on its own without Lidl being involved, but an area and an asset that's being involved. And I just wonder if there is an opportunity here for when there is a site like this that is sold, that is open space and so on, that some reasonable resources, perhaps modest resources, could be made available to the local, in this case Upton, Wirral Together Fund, so that some of the resources that would come from the sale of this land could then be used by local councils in the community to make other improvements within the area. So I'd ask you, Chair, to think of that as an option. But I do think, for the factors that have been identified, that we should go forward with this particular sale. And I know it is a frustration from residents who have the view that because it's the council that's looking to sell, then also, and the council runs planning, that the two are linked. When of course I think we all know that they are not. And my experience of planning committee and so on, the planning department, is they do take the separation and the Chinese wall, if you will, very seriously indeed. And there is no no automatic assumption that because the council has sold the land, the planning permission will automatically be given. So for those reasons, for the jobs, for the fact it's not greenbelt, for the impact on our budget, on the council's budget, and the information with regards to that David shared with us in terms of the work that's being done with regards to the actual shop itself and what it's going to do there about making sure that there is shrubbery and these things are shielded. I certainly would look to go ahead. And I think the other thing we could look at, and I know this is something that's close to your heart, Chair, is social value. So we now have a situation, don't we, with Lidl making considerable investments, and we haven't even talked about the benefits of the investment and buildings and so on and so forth. But as they're making significant investments, must be way over several £1 million by now, that perhaps if they're going to be involved on Wirral, we could perhaps look at approaching Lidl and say, what is going to be your approach? What other benefits are you going to bring to residents of Wirral? And there must be opportunities for us to have those conversations, subject, apart from planning, which is completely different, but in terms of some of those investments that are going on. So that would be certainly my approach, Chairman. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Green. Councillor Stuart next. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I understand and appreciate people's objections and concerns with regards to this, but I don't want to veer into planning and other legislation matters. Tonight here we're discussing about whether or not the council wishes to sell this piece of land, which has been valued at £820,000. There's the difficulty that I have there is that that's £820,000 that's going into the council coffers. That's £820,000 that we're not going to be asking the public for by raising taxes and things like that. This is not a matter of planning tonight. It's on the subject of the sale of this land. I suppose what may not be too unusual, but it seems a bit unusual to me, is that this land is sold subject to planning permission, which does technically mean that if it doesn't get the planning permission, then the council will not benefit from that sale. However, the flip side to it is, if this was sold without subject to planning permission on the market, then we would have no idea over who is buying that land and what they would use it for. So we have a bit of saving grace there in the sense that we know who's buying the land and what their intentions are. But based on this evening is about whether it's the sale of this land. It's not about the planning, it's not about the environmental impact. All those things will be assessed and judged in separate venues, and quite rightly so. Thank you, Chair.
Apologies, I am really struggling tonight with my IT. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Thank you,
Yes.
Councillor Stuart. Councillor Nolan, you're next, and I can also see Councillor Cleary's hand up too. So, Yvonne first.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll be brief. As others have said, this is not any kind of discussion about any of the issues as to the viability of this, what appears to be the proposed intention to build on this land, or any impacts on the local area. That's not what this is about. This is about selling this piece of land. Those discussions and those decisions will be taken elsewhere than this committee. So I think we need to be very, very clear, and I'm certainly very clear about that. In terms of the sale of this land, I understand what David Armstrong says about valuers and their professional qualifications and their professional registrations, and I absolutely agree, fully respect their decision. What amazes me is that £1 million an acre, the land which is almost directly opposite a site that was sold some 30 years ago for £1 million an acre, which is now where Sainsbury's and Homebase sit. And I am absolutely amazed that in 30 years, value of that land for commercial development hasn't increased at all. So I just think that's a really interesting position to be in. But I absolutely support the sale of this land. The position this council is in, because of position of austerity that we've been put in by the government, and because of the way in which all local councils have been treated over COVID, the promises that were made, the promises that have been broken, and the budget deficits we have to meet, we have no choice but to sell this land, and I would support the sale of it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Nolan. I'm going to bring Councillor Cleary in. I don't see any other hands up after that, but David, perhaps you could then answer the questions and comments that have come after Councillor Cleary's spoken. Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, my take on this would be that this gives us an opportunity actually to think about this from scratch, really, and I would really encourage people to do that. The comments have been made about the planning process. The planning process is there to facilitate development. There is a presumption in favour of development. And I think the members of the public who care about this issue and are listening in will be very concerned to hear councillors kind of absolving themselves of that aspect. It's entirely legitimate for this committee to consider aspects that will also, if it comes to it, be relevant to any planning application. So, and I think there are so many grounds on which we need to stop and consider this. It's been mentioned previously that there are so many similar outfits in close proximity. There are, within 3.5 miles, there are 2 Sainsbury's, 3 Aldis, 2 Lidls and 2 Asdas. There's clearly not a great public demand for yet another superstore in this location. We have, as everybody knows, very challenging housing targets for the borough, and people who don't want us to build on the Greenbelt will quite rightly be looking at this and thinking, well, why is the council selling off brownfield land to a multinational company for a supermarket when we need brownfield land for housing development? There's a clear conflict there. The impact on local businesses has already been mentioned. Again, it's difficult for us to say that we want to support local business, we want to support the high street, if we're then facilitating yet more supermarkets. And Councillor Green mentioned the 30 jobs that will be created. Well, how many jobs will be lost? You know, Upton High Street has got a butcher, it's got a greengrocer. Those kind of businesses will clearly be affected if Lidl build a superstore here. The environmental impacts are obvious: more traffic, more pollution, more congestion, more hard surfacing for that will intensify flooding risk. David Armstrong, the officer, mentioned the redirection of a public footpath. There is also the loss of a public footpath. So we will lose a public footpath and another one will be redirected. So again, the pedestrian is being told to get out of the way to facilitate more space for car parking. I would also refer to some deficiencies I feel are in the actual report. The second sentence of the report says the sale will support the Wirral plan and its delivery through the generation of a capital receipt and promotion of economic activity. No mention whatsoever of our environmental commitments in terms of the Wirral plan. No mention of our commitments in terms of supporting small business and supporting the high street. It seems that the Wirral plan is used to kind of support what officers want to recommend and conveniently ignore those aspects that actually go against the argument. Item 10 on the report, the environment and climate implications, says the sale of this site will result in the loss of some amenity space and the new food store will be built in accordance with current energy efficiency legislation. I mean, the environment and climate implications of a little superstore on this site are clearly negative, okay? It doesn't matter how energy efficient they build the actual superstore, it will have a carbon footprint, it will have impacts on congestion, on traffic, on air quality, and the health and well-being of local residents. So I'm very concerned that we've worked very hard to get the environment and climate implications into these reports, and it's not good enough that they are kind of dismissed so thoroughly that the new food store will be built in accordance with current energy efficiency legislation. That's not good enough. Officers need to do much better in terms of pointing out honestly what the environment and climate implications are. So I would say in closing that this gives us a great opportunity to stop and think again. There are so many negatives to the sale of this land that we really need to pause, we need to reconsider, and I would suggest that the committee gives very firm thought to that, and we should reject the recommendations in the report, have a proper look at this land. If we don't sell it to Lidl, Lidl will not build a superstore, and the site will in turn then become available for other uses. So it doesn't have a nil value, and other options should have been considered. So there are my comments, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. Councillor Gilchrist has his hand up again. Councillor Gilchrist?
Thanks very much. Thank you. I want to make sure that I'm right and not confused, which you'll appreciate. As I read it, in October 2019, the decision was taken by Cabinet member or Cabinet to sell the bulk of this land. So that decision is already taken. Are we not merely discussing the extra bit here? Could Mr. McCourt just clarify to make sure that we all know exactly what we are discussing? Thank you.
Phil,
through you, Chair, and Mr. Armstrong may wish to add further comment to this, but I have read this asking the committee to make the decision afresh. We've not addressed promissory estoppel or any of those elements that might bind the committee into the previous decision. So I have read this as starting again from fresh. David.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Phil. I mean, I'm not the lawyer here, Phil, you are. What I did was felt it was necessary to bring this report back because the decision to sell land last October related to one red line drawing, and the drawing of the land that is required it includes the additional triangle, and I felt it was therefore it had to come back for a decision. The decision was made in October 2019 was to sell the bulk of this land. I think it's for you to advise me that if the committee rejects this additional piece of land, does the sale of the original October 19 land, if Lidl were to come back and say we can look at this, would that still stand? That's highly unlikely because they've gone into this in some detail and they've said that to make this project work, that additional triangle of land is needed. So the sole reason for bringing this back was that amendment due to the error to do with the land boundary. Thank you.
Did you want to come back on that, Phil?
No, Chair. That I believe that confirms my view was given. So this is a decision afresh.
Thank you. I've got one more hand up, and I think that would be the last hand I'm going to take. I think everybody has been allowed to speak on this and put their views and questions forward. Councillor Usher.
Thanks, Chair. Listening to David, I'm really glad that he highlighted the kind of the wall between those who are going to be involved with a potential planning consideration and those who have been involved with preparation for the sale of the land. You know, he gone into some history here, which is that, you know, it'd already been decided but had to come back because of an alteration. And I think that addresses some of the concerns that were raised by members of the public and some members about, you know, what exactly we should be really considering when it comes to our decision today. We shouldn't really be weighing in on, although it's tempting, you know, to see it from a resident's perspective, because from the prism of a resident, obviously you'll see a scheme and you know, a proposal, and you will obviously be interested in how that is likely to affect you. Unfortunately, it's been explained, I think, and it's something that we have to adhere to, is that we need to have that separation between the planning considerations and the consideration of the sale of the land. That is frustrating for some residents to get their heads around, and you know, local government can be obtuse at times, but you know, it's not appropriate here. I think you know, some of the concerns that have been raised about the sale of the land is around our commitment to, you know, sort of the climate emergency, the fact that it's a piece of green space that the community uses. We are committed to, you know, good quality green spaces for communities. We are committed to doing what we can as an organisation to combat the climate emergency. We can't do any of that if we don't have any money. We are facing huge financial challenges from COVID because, as Councillor Nolan has said, some of the promises that were given to local government have been abandoned. We're facing a second wave without the appropriate funding to deal with that, and that's after a decade of austerity. So we've got significant financial challenges, and I can't see that that our residents would thank us if, instead of this, because let's talk about the only real alternatives here, we would either increase taxes to the tune of £820,000 or cut services that residents value and residents actually need at this point. I mean, £820,000 is probably about 24 social workers, and we're seeing a huge rise in demand for children's social care because of family breakdown, because of the pressures that some of our residents are under right now. So we have to put this decision into perspective, and we have to consider the only other alternatives on the table. It may not be a decision that we relish, but it is a decision that we have to take. And as well as all of those other responsibilities I've gone through, we also have a significant responsibility to balance the books and to take financially wise decisions. And I don't see how we can't actually go ahead with the sale. I'd be minded to go ahead with it. So I suppose, Chair, it would be, I'd be interested, and I think this was mentioned to us. We've explored this option, or we've talked about this before. It'd be great if I could propose that we agree to the sale of the land, but that we ask David Armstrong or the appropriate officer to come back to us with a recommendation that would agree to a very a small amount of the capital receipts from this sale to go towards local projects in the area, or to be ring fenced so that it can be invested locally. Just as a gesture to our demonstration that this is a decision that we're taking for our residents and not against them. Thanks,
Okay.
Chair.
Good. So do I have a seconder for that?
I'll second that. Chair.
Okay. So, Councillor Nolan, did you put your hand up to second it, or did you have an additional comment or question?
I'll second that, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Gilchrist.
Thank you. I've put in the chat that I wish to move that the additional triangular area shown near property 210 be not included in the sale. I hope members understand which bit that is. That's the additional triangle that comes as the later suggestion. I'd like to move that. Thank you.
And do you have a seconder for that?
Yeah, that's an amendment.
Yeah, I'll second that, Chair.
Okay. I'm going to come over to you, Phil. Now, I think that the debate and the questions are have concluded. We have two propositions on the table, both of which slightly differ from the recommendation that's come before us tonight. Could you advise, please?
Yes, Chair. You took Councillor Usher's proposition first, which is as per the recommendation with an additional request for the further report to come back. Councillor Gilchrist has moved that the land be sold with the exception of the extra triangle. I take that to be an amendment. So if you could vote first on Councillor Gilchrist's amendment and then stand or fall, that would allow you to go back to a substantive motion or the original motion.
Jesus, shoot.
Okay, thank you. So is this roll call? Is it Phil? And are you going to do that? Oh, sorry, Councillor Rush has come back in.
Chair, just for clarity, would it be okay to ask an officer would agreeing to the sale of the land without this particular without the piece that Councillor Gilchrist has proposed in his amendment, would that pose a significant risk that this wouldn't go through at all? Would this pose a significant risk that we get that this kind of falls through? I don't know whether you'd be able to comment on that, or just again reiterate what perhaps what conversations have been had and what's been communicated to you about that.
Through you, Chair. I deliberately didn't involve myself in the pre-consultation planning discussions for the reasons I outlined earlier, because I had some involvement and at that time managed the persons responsible for the valuation. My understanding is that without that triangle of land, the scheme doesn't work in planning terms and doesn't work for Lidl. Those few additional car parking spaces are required to make the scheme work. That's my understanding. That was the advice. That was the advice given.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right then. So Phil, just to clarify, Phil McCourse, that we are now going to take Councillor Gilchrist's amendment to a vote.
Yes, Chair. So that is as proposed by Councillor Usher, with an amendment that the extra triangle of land is removed from the offer for sale. Councillor Anderson.
So sorry, you need to clarify that for me, Phil.
Yes. So
deja vu all over. This is so. What are we voting on now?
Right. So this is so an amendment to Councillor Usher's position. So as per Councillor Usher, but an amendment that the offer for sale is reduced to that area of land previously discussed.
Okay. Thanks.
Councillor Anderson.
Against Councillor Gilchrist's amendment.
Councillor Carubia.
For.
Councillor Cleary.
For.
Councillor Clements.
Against the amendment.
Councillor Gilchrist.
For, thank you.
Councillor Green.
Against the amendment.
Councillor Gray.
Phil, I think Councillor Gray excused herself from the debate earlier.
Oh, of course, yes, I do apologise. Councillor Hodson.
Against the amendment.
Councillor Leech.
Against the amendment.
Councillor McManus.
Against the amendment.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Against the amendment.
Councillor Nolan.
Against the amendment.
Councillor Rennie.
Councillor Rennie against the amendment.
Councillor Spriggs.
Councillor Spriggs against the amendment.
Councillor Stuart.
Councillor Paul Stuart against the amendment.
Councillor Usher.
Against the amendment.
And Councillor Williamson.
Against the amendment.
Thank you, members. I'll just let Democratic Services check my adding up.
Chair, I've just typed in the chat bar. That was for the amendment 3, against 13.
So that folds, Chair. And that takes you back to the original motion as proposed by Councillor Usher. That's to sell the land as proposed in the report, together with a request that officers bring back a report on isolating a portion of the sale for local causes.
Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
For.
Councillor Carubia.
For.
Councillor Cleary.
Against.
Councillor Clements.
For.
Councillor Gilchrist. Councillor Gilchrist.
Yeah, against. Sorry, did you catch that earlier one? Thank you.
No. Councillor Green.
Councillor Jeff Green, for.
Councillor Hodson.
For.
Councillor Leech.
For.
Councillor McManus.
For.
Councillor McLaughlin.
For.
Councillor Nolan.
For.
Councillor Rennie.
Councillor Lesley Rennie for.
Councillor Spriggs.
Councillor Chris Spriggs. Councillor Chris Spriggs for.
Councillor Stuart.
Councillor Paul Stuart, for.
Councillor Usher.
Cllr Tom Usher, for.
And Councillor Williamson.
Councillor Williamson for.
Thank you, members. That's clearly carried, and Dem Services will put the numbers in the box.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Can I thank you for the tone of the debate? It's not been a particularly easy issue for us to talk about, and I appreciate the fact that it's been a good debate and a nuanced one that's recognised all of the concerns and issues around this. If people are okay, can I just suggest a 5-minute comfort break, given that we do have a few agenda items to go yet, and we had a bit of a delayed start anyway, didn't we? Could I suggest now it's 36 minutes past 7 that we reconvene at 1:45? Is that okay?
Very welcome, Chair, here.
Okay. All right then. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Okay, thank you. Welcome back, everyone. We are now going to, we've got a slight change in our agenda order again. We have agenda item listed as number 9, which is the sale of the land at Rock Ferry High. We thought we'd take this next, given that we've just discussed something similar, but obviously with a different plot of land. So I'm going to invite David Armstrong to speak again to this, and then ask for comments, questions afterwards. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is another disposal. This relates to the former site of Rock Ferry High School in Rock Ferry. Very briefly, the school closed in 2011. Efforts were made. This was when it became an academy, and it joined the Academy Trust, joined it with what we knew as Park High School in Birkenhead, and the two schools joined together to become Birkenhead Academy. It was the University of Chester at the time. It's now a different trust, and that resulted in the trust taking the decision to close this site in 2011. There were attempts to find other uses for the site as a technology college and also a possible college linked with the Isle of Man. They didn't develop, so the site was declared surplus in 2015. A decision was taken by the council in September 2015 for this site to be sold for housing, and in 2016 all the buildings on the site were demolished except for one, a building known as Ravenswood, which was one of the two original houses on the site before the school was built. The other house is long gone. This house, Ravenswood, had been used by the school for many, many years and was the original property on the site. It is sort of Victorian residential property, big Victorian property. In January 2020, the council took the decision to sell the site to Taurus. We had been working with a housing provider, Liverpool Mutual Homes. They developed a scheme, and the proposal was to sell it to them. They became part of the Taurus group. Taurus took them over, so the sale went to Taurus. Planning permission was granted in February 2020, and in March 2020 there was a major arson attack on the house at Ravenswood. Ravenswood was not demolished because it was listed. It was listed, an application was made by a private individual. Well, it was made by somebody who was a council employee at the time, but they did it in a private capacity for this building, a Bebington Library, and another building on the Rock Ferry site. And Bebington Library and Ravenswood were listed. Measures were taken to try and protect Ravenswood over the 9-year period. It suffered theft of lead, and it suffered attacks, but to varying degrees. The council, I feel, did its best to try and protect it amongst the whole of its estate. But in March there was an arson attack, a major arson attack, which resulted in considerable damage to the building, and that affected the agreed value. So the sale is already below the commercial value for the site because we're selling it to a registered provider to provide a number of affordable homes. We're providing 102 extra care homes, 19 shared ownership homes, and 65 affordable rent homes. So for those reasons, again, the valuers are satisfied that the reduced price of 1.2 million meets the relevant national criteria for selling to a registered provider to build affordable housing. And because Taurus are a registered national body that can draw down grant, that they can bring in 7.5 million of Homes England grant to develop the site. So that brings in that money. They're a lead body nationally for access to grants through Homes England, both for extra care and for the affordable housing. So the proposal is to sell the site to Taurus for 1.2 million and for them to develop the site for those units of affordable housing. The house itself, Ravenswood, will be refurbished and will be repaired for apartments, so it will form a centrepiece of the site. There's been a very, very extensive consultation for this. It's been a lengthy process, and it is seen as being a good scheme, and it's ready to go because planning permission is in place, and I understand that it is ready to start very quickly. It also releases the council of an obligation to try and keep Ravenswood secure, and since the fire we've had to have 2 security guards on duty virtually 24 hours a day. The site was protected prior to that by measures we'd never used before, such as remote CCTV, but even then people managed to find their way into it. So that's the report, Chair. It's seeking approval for the disposal. It's hopefully the last piece in a jigsaw that started in 2011 and then puts the site to a repurposed use. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I mean, I just want to say that I was really upset to see, the arson attack, just speechless really over that level of, mindless kind of criminality. I can see that Councillor McLaughlin wants to speak and Councillor Nolan. So in that order, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. I'm speaking as the ward councillor primarily on this. And I have had a very long involvement with this site, over 5 years actually, when the proposal to sell the land was first made public, and there was uproar. And I think it's fair to say there was absolute uproar at the plans that were thought to be going to take place at that time. So it's been a long and difficult journey, but there are a group of people I want to pay tribute to, really. One is the residents who formed themselves into a residents group with representatives from each of the roads that bound the site. And they've worked very, very closely with our council officers, David Armstrong, David Ball and Janette Royal, and more recently with the Taurus officers. And I have to say that at every stage of the development of this, residents have put their concerns forward. They had requirements that they considered absolutely essentials, and officers have responded to those every step of the way. Till we've got to the point now where we've got planning permission for a development which does, in the main, satisfy all the demands that residents had in the first instance, which were that Ravenswood be maintained and refurbished, that the gates of the original site be maintained, that the original stone wall was maintained, that the green space was protected, and that the housing development on the site would be done in such a way that it would lead to people who got a genuine interest in the whole area being accommodated there. And the housing development that's planned is in fact doing that, because there will be, tourists have said at stages that there will be a requirement to demonstrate that people who are putting their names forward for these houses will have had a local involvement. The houses themselves will be offered as either shared ownership, rent to buy or rental, and also we've got the extra care housing on that site. So all in all, I think residents are certainly, they're expecting development to start in January. They've had notice from tourists that that is their intention. That is what they are expecting. And I'm sure they will keep on making their views known about how the site is being managed to tourists during that developmental stage. But I think just the other day, actually, I had an email circulated, which probably Yvonne got as well, which showed how pleased residents are with the work that's already being done on the Ravenswood building itself, Ravenswood House, and that's starting to look quite good now, and they're happy with that. So I would hope that residents, that members of the committee will support this for the reasons that David outlined, apart from the cost it's been to the council to maintain it in security, for the fact that we need houses of this type in this area, and also the fact that the residents have been so fully involved in the proceedings up to this point. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McLaughlin. I guess that was more of a positive comment than a question for David to answer. So I'll bring in Councillor Nolan now.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would echo also what Councillor McLaughlin has said about the importance of this development. And since I've been involved, which is not nearly as long as she has with this development, but it is absolutely vital. And in particular, not only the affordable and shared ownership homes, but absolutely the extra care facility, which we desperately need. So I am delighted that we are looking really at a shovel-ready project now. However, I am disappointed about the reduction that tourists have made in their offer for this site on the basis of the fire at Ravenswood. I appreciate that Ravenswood was extensively damaged. However, Ravenswood was already not in a great state and would have needed a fair bit of refurbishment. There are only going to be 8 apartments there, and considering that we're looking at 160 odd units on that site, I'm not quite sure how 8 apartments equates to a drop in their offer of 800,000. And maybe David could explain that, because I haven't quite managed to compute that yet. Having said all of that, I would absolutely agree that our officers have responded extremely well to the queries and the concerns of local residents. They have certainly gone the extra mile in terms of their involvement, and I would like to pay tribute to David and all of his officers on that one, and to record my thanks, certainly. So yes, I do hope that this committee will support this sale. It's vitally important. for the whole area. It's also vitally important that we are maintaining the adjoining playing fields as they are as green open space, and that's also very welcome by the local community. So I very much look forward to seeing our extra care and our affordable and shared ownership homes in place within the next couple of years. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Nolan. David, do you want to briefly come back on Councillor Nolan's question around the valuation?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's a fair question. Clearly, if the fire hadn't taken place, the property would have been empty for 9 years anyway, and that meant it had deteriorated. Clearly, in a previous role in the council, I knew this building well, going back to 1990, and I know that it had minimum maintenance carried out on it, both by ourselves and the school. And I know that some of the things which have been attributed to the fire and the roof lead being stolen, like water in the basement, had been very long-standing issues over many years. That's not to diminish them, and also prior to the school becoming academy, we had planned to rationalise the school into its original main buildings. So the 1970s extensions were going to go as far as possible, as was this property. We were going to condense the school as it reduced in number into the main building, which in turn had suffered a major fire some years earlier. Clearly that was overtaken by events, and so this building was the subject of minimum maintenance over a very long period. It was also a house, and it was subject to many years of thousands of young people's feet banging up and down the stairs and using it as a teaching base. So it did suffer a high degree of wear and tear. So it was in a poor condition, and in fairness to the surveyors from the housing groups, the two housing groups that were involved, they didn't have ready access to it because we had boarded it up securely and so on, and they couldn't get full access to it. And I think there was already a substantial amount of work that needed to be done to it that they hadn't been able to quantify when they made their original offer. And then clearly the fire added to that considerably in terms of the bill. We have worked with them very positively in terms of recovering the building back from the fire. So I think, and we also had the evaluation independently checked. The bulk of this capital receipt has to go to school capital projects because it relates to the playing field element of the site. So some £950,000 is ring-fenced for that. And Janette identified some years ago that the school for this should be Riverside. Riverside is a school near the town hall in Wallasey, which was built at the height of the open plan era and doesn't have classrooms as such. It was built as a series of corridors and bays, and it's in desperate need of some work. Just before I stop, I would also like to say thank you to the residents. I knew some of these residents from my days when this was a school. We haven't always seen eye to eye on everything, and I'm sure, but they have been excellent guardians of this site. Through many years. They had to tolerate a major demolition programme, and they've also participated fully in the consultation. So I would like to add my thanks and the thanks from the people I work with to those residents as well, and wish the scheme well. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Councillor Cleary, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a brief comment from me. I'm very happy to support the recommendation in the report, but again, I would highlight Section 10 of the report, the environment and climate implications, which say the transaction will result in the development of this vacant site and derelict property with modern homes built to current energy efficiency standards. Now, I'm sorry, but we don't build negative carbon homes yet in Wirral. Hopefully we will in the future. We build housing developments with a positive carbon footprint. And it's important that officers are honest in their assessment of the climate implications of each and every item that comes to this committee. Section 10 as it stands is just simply not fit for purpose. Thank you.
David, do you want to come back on that?
Chair, I can just take that comment away and I'll discuss it with the team that are involved. Thank you.
All right. I don't think anybody else has indicated that they want to speak. And the comments that we've had have all been really positive. I'd also like to add, a well done on this. This is much needed. So can we have someone move this recommendation?
I'll move that, Chair.
Seconded.
And if you don't mind, I'd like to second this.
That's nice. See, there you go. That's nice to see. Cross-ward, cross-party working. Okay. Do we need to go to a vote? I think we do. Do we, Phil?
Chair, can I suggest you go by assent? So it's carried unless anybody objects and wishes.
Okay. And I don't see any objections, so There we go. Okay. Is that registered then, Phil?
It is, Chair, yes.
Thank you. All right then. Thanks, everyone. Just bear with me now while I try and get the agenda up on another screen. Okay. So because we've jigged it about a bit, let's try and get it back into some kind of order. I did originally propose that we did the budget items at the beginning. We haven't done that now, so I don't really see any point in sort of bringing them in. I think we should go to the car parking charges options, if that's all right with everyone. Yeah, I haven't had anyone say that it's not then, or indicate otherwise. So I'm going to bring Nikki Butterworth in to talk to this report. Thank you.
Hi and evening, members. So this report is brought to you tonight to consider options for the reintroduction of the current car park and charges policy in Wirral for this year, 20 to 21, and also shows alternative options for parking for 21-22 and beyond. Just to remind you, in April 20 this year, and in the early days of the pandemic, to assist residents and key workers in parking for free when accessing food for shops and essentials, and also to help those businesses that were able to remain open and encourage public to use parks and open spaces in line with the government guidance. The council took the decision to suspend all the council's car parking charges at on-street and off-street, plus country parks locations. So this report presents a wide range of options. There's several appendices in relation to the reintroduction of charges. Now, in the short term, the recommendation is to reintroduce parking charges across the borough at the tariffs set in March earlier this year for the 2021 in accordance with existing policy. This is also generally in line with our neighbouring authorities. Again, this is in the appendices for your perusal, and where it also goes some way to recover some income for the remainder of this financial year. However, understanding that committee members will wish to fully consider all options and make informed recommendations of those options or any others that the committees wish to put forward. For you really to best address and balance the council's budget position, the economic recovery of local businesses, the climate emergency, the local plan, public health implications, and also how we help towards addressing any inequalities across the borough. So there's two recommendations within this report. One is to approve the option to immediately reintroduce the car parking charges as at the current tariffs, which was set in March of this year until March next year, and also to allow myself and other officers to consult on the implications of the medium and long-term options. Again, a lot of this is detailed in Appendix 1 to the report, and we would bring a further report to the Environment, Climate and Transport Committee in early 2021 with a recommendation around those budget options as we move forward. But at this point, I'm conscious that there is a lot of detail which members will wish to consider. So I wanted to pass over to Simon Fox now, our AD for Highways and Infrastructure, to provide a bit further detail on the report and appendices. And we also have a senior officer, Steve Atkins, available. He leads on our parking services to help the committee with any points of clarification on the report or the appendices. So if I can just pass to Simon at this point.
Thanks, Nikki. Thanks, Chair. All I would add to that is that members would be interested to know what the actual parking income levels are. And in a normal year, the income is £35,500 a week. Obviously, with the COVID situation, that is significantly estimated to have been reduced. We haven't been charging for parking, as Nikki says, since April, and therefore we have no direct evidence of what the current patronage of our car parks is. That would normally be based on ticket sales. So not having ticket sales, we haven't got any data. We have done some casual surveys, and we have spoken to neighbouring authorities who have implemented charges, and we have estimated that the levels of parking within our car parks are running at about 40%. So that's what our figures are based on in Appendix 1, members. That would equate to about £14,200 a week. So the sort of available income for the remainder of the financial year, if you chose to accept recommendation 1, would be of the order of £300,000. I think the some of our car parks obviously are busier than that, and some are less busy. But that's the best estimate we can provide really in terms of usage at this moment in time. But the situation has obviously provided us with a significant budget pressure for the year. I think that's all I've got to say. Please, if anyone's got any questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you both. This is another item on our agenda, which is, it's difficult. There's so many issues here as well, isn't there, around businesses suffering through COVID at the minute, against our active travel strategy, against people not wanting to use public transport or being advised not to unless it's essential. So I'm going to invite, I have Councillor Carubia and Councillor Green who wish to speak. Thanks. Councillor Carubia?
Thank you, Chair. I think it was Councillor Green first, but I'll take the opportunity to jump in.
Sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, this is a really interesting point about the finances and everything else. And I think it's no surprise, it won't come as a surprise to anybody, that I've always championed the fact that we should have free car park spaces in the country park. So my first question would be, to the officer who just mentioned the 300,000, what percentage of that is from the car parks in country parks, to see what we will be losing if we don't do it there. I have a big concern about, we're looking at things like obesity in Wirral, and health, both physical and mental health, due to the lockdown and the coronavirus, and yet we could be talking about putting car park charges back in the country parks. On the section on 3.4, it does say that the lockdown restrictions have since been relaxed, and there have been a large gatherings of people at our car parks and open spaces, coastal locations, etc. I think that is not going to happen now going into the winter months, although we are going back into a more restricted lockdown areas. So I'm wondering whether it would be possible to look at an option whereby we would look at car parking in the shopping areas, etc., but not in the country parks. If that's I can't see if that's an option on the papers.
Apologies there, I'm having trouble. Yeah, maybe there's some clarification needed at this point. I think there are going to be several options going to the relevant committee for that to be discussed and debated there. I think tonight is, what is the decision? Could you confirm what the decision is that you're looking for us to agree on tonight, please, Nikki?
Yes, so those two decisions, there's two recommendations in the report, which is to approve the option to immediately introduce the car parking charges as at the existing tariffs, which had been set at full council back in March, April time, and also for myself and my officers in the team to consult on the implications of the medium and long term options detailed in Appendix 1. And there are many variations of those options that we will work through to support the Environment, Climate, Emergency and Transport Committee between now and early 2021, which will come back with a recommendation of part of the budget options for next year.
Okay, so does that help, Chris?
Not really.
No.
We can add that particular option. We can add to, if you look at appendices 1, there are 20 options that officers have pulled together, but that's not exhaustive. So we can absolutely take that away for the 21-22 option. Or are you looking for something more immediate?
If I may, Chair, I think the whole issue of this is we're talking about the effects that the COVID is having on our residents and shops, businesses, etc., etc. And I'm just wondering why we can't be looking at an option right now where we could look at car parking in general across the borough, but exclude specifically country parks to allow people to have the freedom of walking around and being a bit more healthy and getting their heads together in the country parks as opposed to having to pay for it. So I'm hoping that would be able to be added as an option.
Yeah.
Confirmed.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Councillor Green, apologies for bypassing you there.
It's quite all right, Councillor Williamson. Yes, okay. I looked at this report, and I think it's quite similar to the report Cabinet considered a little while ago that we then had a call in where the then scrutiny committee didn't believe it was the right time to introduce car parking charges. It went to council, and then there was the announcement that it was that car parking charges wouldn't be reintroduced and would in fact come to the first Policy and Resources Committee. So, you know, in terms of the gestation period of this report, that's fair enough. I think my concern around this is twofold, really. First of all, as you indicated, Janette, that we currently have guidance. So so COVID is starting to increase again. We've got special measures that are being introduced or have been introduced in Wirral. We've got advice that people shouldn't use public transport unless for vital or an emergency type travel. So that is, for me, quite a big issue. So what we're saying is we don't want people to go on the bus to go and do their shopping or to visit. Then we've got, and as you've indicated, with the initiative around the nighttime economy, in fact, in terms of the impact that this is having on businesses, both large and small. And small businesses tend to be congregated around around town centres. Town centres tend to have council car parks, and council car parks tend to charge on street and off street, as well as parks, which Chris knows I've got a long history in opposing generally. So I think it's a bit early at this stage to reintroduce car parking charges. I also think that that with Christmas coming up, local businesses, in terms of what they've been through, again, I think it would be again too early to reintroduce car parking charges. So I am conscious of the financial situation in terms of the impact. However, as we've been told by Simon, roughly about 40%, down from 35,000 to 14,200 a week. So I would imagine, in terms of the difference in income, that would be a reasonable approach to take in terms of the capitalisation that we're probably looking at a little bit later, when we think about the loss of income to the council, COVID-related income. So I think what I would prefer, Chair, if at all possible, is that if we were to say that we wouldn't reintroduce car parking charges at the moment in this calendar, not financial, but this calendar year, that we ask the, it's quite a snappy title, but it's the Environment, Climate, Emergency and Transport Committee to do a piece of work quite urgently to look at the whole issue of car parking charges and look at the sustainability issues in terms of fees and charges in terms of car parking, and so I think that's primarily. I think it would benefit residents. It would benefit the local businesses, and it would help us in terms of what we're trying to do with regards to public health and keeping people away from public transport at the moment. I don't think it's a huge financial burden that we'll be putting in, because again we'd be looking for capitalisation of the difference in those two figures. It certainly would. I'm not saying it should be all the financial year. We're looking at actually going up to the end of this financial year. So I think that would have those mutual benefits while we allow the Environment, Climate, Emergency and Transport Committee to make some to look at options, even options that aren't necessarily in the appendices, and come forward as a matter of some urgency back to this committee in order to build that into any budget discussions that we might have subsequently. So I think what I would suggest, and I'll try and write this down if that's the way we're doing it in the chat boxes, which are a bit of a weird way of doing it, but that we don't approve recommendation 1, that we approve recommendation 2, and we ask for this to be done as a matter of urgency. So at the end of this calendar year, that we have a clear view about how we're going forward with regards to charges, car parking charges across the piece. So I think that's my suggestion, that I think would be beneficial in public health terms, in local businesses terms, small businesses, and I think it would be a sensible way forward for people who've been pretty hard pressed actually over the summer, but now again with the increase in number of cases and infections and the action we're asking people to do, it would be consistent with our public health message. So that would be my suggestion, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I can just see a few other people who put their hands up first before we then conclude this. Councillor McManus, Councillor Usher, and then Councillor...
Yeah, I think I had my hand up first. I put my hand up as Councillor Green was indicating he wanted to...
Sorry, I just...
Okay, yeah. I know it's difficult.
So
I will be
you
very...
had your hand up.
I will be very brief because I can see there's a number of people who want to contribute to this. And to be honest, I was... First of all, I'm very conscious that the suspension of the car parking charges was a temporary measure, and you can't make temporary permanent, and so you've got to have an end line. Having said that, I take on board the points that are being made about the difficulties still are there with COVID. That situation really hasn't changed that much. In fact, it probably worse than it was a while ago in some respects. I'm also very conscious that the country parks, the charges in the country parks were hugely damaging, actually, rather than helpful up there, as what it led to was congestion around the roadways around, especially Eastham. So I'm very conscious of that. So my support for the first part of the recommendation was predicated on the fact that we would get a very quick review and get a new scheme in place which accommodated for those difficulties that have been arising. But I think on balance I could support Councillor Green's recommendation, which does seem to be a reasonable compromise, with the proviso that there is speed in bringing forward a new set of a revised plan for charging.
Thanks Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor McManus.
Thank you, Janette. I think Councillor Green makes some very valid points earlier regarding small business and the use of public transport. However, when you take into consideration that we, based on 40% usage, we're losing approximately £14,500 a week, it is a lot of money given the budget pressures we've got brought on by not only COVID but austerity. I was the Cabinet member at the time who extended free parking, and really, I think, based on what Councillor Green has said, I think that we do need to extend our free parking for all council car parks. And I would suggest that we do that until the new year. Was originally going to say Christmas, but I think to support our local businesses on the New Year sales, then I should think that we should take that through to New Year. So I would second Councillor Green's recommendation. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor McManus. I will reserve my comment till the end. Councillor Usher and then Councillor Gilchrist.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think there's real support for an approach that takes into consideration the fact that we are currently, living through an ever-changing picture. We've got a serious, uptake in cases, COVID cases, and our focus needs to be public health orientated in the short term. And it also needs to take into account the fact that many of our businesses are on the edge, and we've just had some disappointing decisions made nationally about which jobs are and are not worth saving. So I think it would be potentially a mistake and maybe on the whole a financial loss to the council if we were to put additional pressure on already struggling businesses and the jobs that they provide to local people. I think going forward, and I do agree that recommendation 2 is needed urgently. We need to look at what exactly is the purpose of car parking charges. What are we trying to achieve? I would say, it's about ensuring there's a turnover of footfall for our businesses. And I would like to see, and I know that this is something that Janette has expressed, a thread running through all of our policies that takes into account the real social and health inequalities that we've got in this borough, and to see if we could do anything around, that agenda within the longer term way in which we apply car parking charges. So yeah, happy to support what's been put on the table there.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Usher. Councillor Gilchrist, your hand's up.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst before Jeff had formulated his complete proposal, I had put an idea in the chat box, and I appreciate entirely where Jeff's coming from, and it looks as though that is garnering support. My difference, I think, was that there are some long stay car parks where people are prepared, who want to travel and want the security leaving their cars somewhere for many hours, that we might still charge for. But if the majority of members feel that that is not worth including at this stage, then I can understand that. We are, I think, facing a situation where people are anxious about travelling. I do look at buses going past the area around the corner from me, and there are very few people on them. And I fear that people are anxious about using public transport at the moment, despite the ability to sit separately and some distance apart on the bus. And the same applies for rail. I think people probably are feeling that they're safer and more secure in their own vehicles, which has various environmental implications, but that's how they feel. It takes many years to change people's habits, and the threat of COVID is something that's made people more cautious about where they go and where they shop. I think we are in the business of also trying to balance the survival of local shopping centres and local businesses and the economy. So in doing some research on this last year, in the winter months our country parks don't have large numbers of people resorting to them. The fees that I saw coming in between October and December last year across all of them was about £30,000. So clearly there's a need to get people who want to go to the country parks, who feel safe driving there and then are happy to walk and visit when they've got there. That needs specifically to be built in, and I think Councillor Carubia has done that. I did make that suggestion at 8:16 and hear what other members feel about the long stay parking. But if there's no great support for that element of charging, then I'm content to follow Councillor Green, who's being supported widely as I see it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gilchrist. Now I can see Councillor Green's hand is up. I'm assuming that's because you're going to give us a form of words. So I'll just add my comments before we do that. This is another difficult one, isn't it? I mean, I'm concerned about this second spike. I'm concerned about people not wanting to use public transport, and they are staying in their cars. Now, on a wider level, we that's something that we want to work towards discouraging in some respects, but I just feel the timing of this one is that's a longer term goal. But the immediacy of the second spike of COVID and against a backdrop of already struggling local businesses, for me, means that I completely agree with everything that's been said tonight. So I'm going to leave it there and bring Councillor Green in.
Just before you do, Chair, if you wouldn't mind, before Councillor Green makes his recommendations, we probably have to vote on. There are other...
sorry, I didn't see. I've just seen... Yeah, I'm sorry. No, Councillor Cleary, your hand's up.
Chair?
Yeah, Councillor Cleary's hand's up.
Okay. You okay for me to go ahead? Right, thanks. That's okay. I know it's not easy, and I appreciate Chris butting in on my behalf. Not for the first time tonight. I will kind of go against the grain. I will speak in favour of what's recommended in the officer's report. Nobody's said it so far, so I'll say it. We've declared a climate emergency, and once again, we're going to kind of ignore that, and we're going to kind of ignore the obvious environmental benefits that come from sending a signal to people to not use their cars when possible. So the government advice was mentioned earlier, and the government advice is clear that people should avoid public transport. But the second aspect of government advice is always that people should look to walk or cycle where possible. And by not charging for parking, we're going against the grain of that advice. We're encouraging people to use their cars, even if walking and cycling is an option, and even if they don't want to use the public transport alternatives. The financial arguments are very clear here. It's regrettable to me that we've already made our budget situation more difficult by not reintroducing car parking charges at an earlier date. And what always seems to get lost in this discussion, I don't know what's so special about transport that, the social justice aspect just really doesn't come up. If we're talking about housing, for example, we'd have a very strong social justice element to that debate. If we were talking about health, we make special allowances for people to get good access to healthcare irrespective of their financial means. But when it comes to transport, it's just all back to front, isn't it? Why should the poor people in our community who can't afford to drive, why should they be subsidising people who do have the luxury of being able to drive? Why is it always the poor who are subsidising the rich when it comes to this issue? And why do politicians always bottle it? Every time this comes up, we just kick it down the road and we refuse to face up to the facts. And I said, our charges are modest. Even if we vote tonight for the recommendation, our charges for car parking are very modest. It will still be cheaper for most people to drive to their local shops, park up pay the parking charges, it will still be cheaper for them to do that than to get the bus or to get the train. It's all completely back to front. And I think, my final point would be, this kind of move, it just sends a signal out to the public that our priority when it comes to transport is the motor vehicle. That's our priority. And it makes it really difficult for us to win hearts and minds when it comes to the difficult decisions that we're going to have to face soon when we take on the new, very welcome government advice to reallocate road space away from cars and towards pedestrians and towards cyclists. It makes it really hard for us to win those arguments when we're constantly telling the public, yeah, you can park for free, you can use your car, we're encouraging to use your car, and all the issues that come up with that, the obesity agenda, the air quality agenda, and of course the climate emergency, we're just falling down on those obligations, and I'm really, really disappointed with the other comments tonight. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. I have seen Councillor Leech's hand is up.
Thanks, Chair. I couldn't not agree with some of the comments made by Pat Cleary. We do have inequality when it comes to this, but the report itself is out of date, is rendered out of date in terms of content straight away because of the COVID crisis that we're facing. We know our businesses are really, really struggling, and if we go with the suggested delay in introducing car parking charges, what we could be faced with if we don't is that the businesses actually go out of business, and that would have an impact on us anyway in terms of the business rates that we would normally get from those businesses. So it's a really difficult one, and I understand everybody's points of view on this, to be honest with you, and I can see it from every angle, but I think we will suffer a loss one way or another if we do reintroduce the charges. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any other hands up now, so I'll bring Councillor Green in.
Chair, I do have my hand up.
There are other hands up, Chair.
And Cllr Usher, Chair. And Councillor Nolan.
I'm sorry, they're just not showing up here at all. So someone said they had the hand up. So Chair, did you have your hand up?
It was me, yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to provide a point of clarification, actually, just before the committee go to a vote, if that's okay. So just in terms of the finances, so Councillor Green mentioned that he thought that the car parking charges that we would lose could be offset by the capitalisation directive. I just wanted to alert the committee to the fact that we're not able to do that because it is a member choice that we are not choosing to reinstate car parking charges, and the capitalisation directive is only available as a direct result of COVID. The other, so we wouldn't be able to reclaim that back from the capitalisation directive. The other point I wanted to make was, as you know, on the agenda is a report about capitalisation, and we have applied, or we are asking for approval to apply for that from MHCLG. MHCLG have been very explicit with us, very specific, to say that to enable them to approve that, or to ask Treasury to approve that, we must do everything we possibly can in our power to make sure that our deficit doesn't increase, and indeed we reduce our budget deficit. So we need to take every action that we possibly can to try and get that deficit down. Obviously, if members are going to vote and agree to not reinstate car parking charges, that would go against MHCLG advice and may well put our capitalisation directive at risk. So, I mean, to mitigate that, what members could do if Councillor Green suggests that a report would come to the Environment Committee as soon as possible. Members could actually ask officers to come up with some alternative savings to offset the car parking charges from the Highways and Transport budget and take those to the Environment Committee for approval. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. I mean, I am concerned to hear that. Obviously, we don't, personally, I don't want to see our capitalisation directive request viewed harshly if we're not seen to maximise available income to us. So thank you for the clarification.
Am I the only one who has lost sound?
No members. Everybody.
It looks like it might be
Williamson is frozen. So if we could just hold on a few minutes and see if we can get her back. Thank you.
Does anybody know any good songs or jokes?
Bryn, can you just make sure the webcast is paused, please, while we allow Councillor Williamson to rejoin?
And of course, no jokes clean enough for this company. So.
Okay. So apologies for that time lag there. My IT's let me down again. So I'm just going to resume the meeting. I believe that the next person with the hand up to speak was Councillor. I know that Councillor Nolan had her hand up, Councillor Stuart and Councillor McManus. So Councillor Nolan.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would be extremely concerned if we were at this point to reintroduce car parking charges. I do think that we are putting, there are additional restrictions now for the general public in terms of their use of public transport. Many people are finding this extremely difficult. Many people are feeling very much under threat, and our local businesses are also suffering as a result of that. And we know that because we know from the numbers, or the numbers that we estimate are actually using our local shopping centres now in comparison to what they were before pre-COVID, and now we've just had additional restrictions. So I think it would be totally wrong of us to reintroduce those charges now. I think we should review them in the new year, as Councillor McManus suggested. I do thank the Director of Finance for her unusual intervention, and I'm quite sure that at the appropriate time that members will ask for her views on this. So I would certainly welcome this committee's decision, if this committee took that decision not to support the reintroduction of car parking charges at this point. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Nolan. Councillor Stuart.
Thanks, Chair. I've got to echo the concerns that other members have got on the committee, which is, you know, the national guidelines are clearly telling people that they've got to only go out in an emergency, work from home when they can, you know, and at a time when we are encouraging people to follow the guidelines. Only a few months ago we removed those parking charges to make it easier for people to follow the guidelines. We've got these coming in, these localised restrictions that are coming in and that we're supposed to be observing, and the reintroduction of these charges at this time seems contradictory to previous advice. And we've got vast amounts of people being made redundant on furlough, on the new furlough scheme, which it wasn't as generous as the previous furlough scheme, which is going to be introduced soon. So we're going to see over the next few months on the run up to Christmas, people's incomes being all but stopped, cut, jobs going. I don't think that now's the right time to reintroduce the car parking charges, but my mind's not completely made up just yet. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Stuart. Do we have any other hands up?
Yes, Chair.
Councillor Usher.
I suppose I would want, I mean, obviously the capitalisation directive is something that we're going to rely on quite heavily, so I think it would be good to get a little bit more detail on that. But I do also want to reject or challenge some claims or some opinions that this is about subsidising people who can afford cars, whilst people who can't have to pay for this as well. I mean, that's absolutely not the case. You absolutely, I think in this moment we do seriously need to consider the public health ramifications of this particular policy, and as Councillor Stuart's outlined, and as you know, other members have stated, you know, if we're encouraging people, you know, to only use public transport when it's essential, to try and distance themselves as much as possible from others, then it's easy to do that, and there's a financial incentive there to do that, if we can consider what's been proposed. I also think that you know, some of the poorest people in Birkenhead and in other locations in the borough rely on their local businesses as employers and as local outlets that they shop at, and then their existence being called into question is not going to help the people in the poorest communities on Wirral. So I don't think it's as black as white as stating that this is somehow not in line with our social and health inequalities agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want to come back to my wording, or?
I was about to say I can't see any other hands up, but I haven't seen any.
My hand's up, Lesley Rennie.
My hand's up as well, Janette.
Okay, I'm quite mindful of time as well, if people have already spoken on this, but I'm happy to bring Councillor Rennie and you haven't spoken tonight.
Yeah.
And Councillor McManus.
Yeah, thank you very much, Janette. Just thinking really on what's been said, and agree with most of it, but I'm not convinced that we've gone against MHCLG at all. I mean, all we've done is defer the decision until a review has taken place, and I'm obviously concerned for the traders as well as the car users, but perhaps we can ask the officers to work with the trader groups. I mean, particularly, you know, my heart is with those in Listcard for the report which actually comes back in the new year, if that would be okay, and I would hope that officers would agree to work with those trade groups. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Any Councillor McManus?
Thanks, Janette. Just bearing in mind what people have said really this evening, I would like to propose a slight amendment to Councillor Green's recommendation. And my recommendation would be, or my amendment would be, that P&R agrees to delay the reintroduction of parking charges while referring an urgent review on how these changes should be applied, and with particular consideration to the agenda around reducing social and health inequalities, and for that to be brought to the Environment Committee for consideration. Thank you. And I'll put that in the type box.
Yeah, I'd like to second that, please, Jan.
So, Phil, can you advise of next steps, please?
Phil, you're on mute.
Apologies, Chair. Councillor Green had originally suggested, rather than moved, that the reintroduction of car parking.
Hang on, no, actually, Phil. I moved it, and it was seconded by Julie.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. And I even put the wording up in the chat box.
Exactly. Forgive me, Councillor Green. What I was about to say is, you originally made a suggestion and then clarified that in the box and made a formal proposition, which was seconded by Councillor McManus. Councillor McManus has now proposed an amendment to that. I just wonder if Councillor Green is happy to accept her amendment or wishes to go to a vote.
Yes, I think that's a friendly amendment. I'm more than happy to accept that. I think just to cover off the issue around that Chair raised in terms of the issue on the capitalisation and so on. I think we should put in there something around P&R works to find any compensatory savings. And so I think we should put something in around that. And I think we should also add, and I'm sure we'd agree this, listening to the discussions that have gone on, something about making sure that we have that consultation with local traders as well. So in terms of, yes, I accept the amendment because I think it's a friendly amendment, and that we add in about compensatory savings just to secure our position on the capitalisation. And we also put in something about consulting with traders. Is that possible, Phil? Julie, is that okay?
Councillor McManus, are you happy to continue to second that? Councillor McManus?
Councillor McManus, are you there?
Councillor McManus is no longer showing in the people present, Chair.
Oh,
so
okay.
If we could
I'm attempting to
adjourn
go back,
just
Chair.
for a short moment while we...
She tells us, sorry Chair, sorry to interrupt, but she's told us by text that she's been kicked out of the call as well.
She should now be back in.
She is, Chair.
Hi, I'm just back in, but
Did you hear that, Julie? I accepted your friendly amendment because I think it is a friendly amendment, and I also mentioned we needed to put something in about to protect our capitalisation. So we say something about P&R works for any compensatory savings, and we also mentioned something in there about making sure we consult with traders, etc. Yeah. And I was just coming back to you saying, are you comfortable with that, really? Has she been thrown out again?
sorry, no, I'm on mute.
Sorry, Julie.
I did hear that then. I'll put something in the chat box if that's okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
We've got that, Chair.
Yes.
Given that Councillor Cleary spoke against, would you rather this went to a vote?
Yes, we will need to.
Thank you, members. If I can ask you to vote in respect of that motion, and just to paraphrase, it is not to reintroduce car parking charges at this moment in time, to seek the review as set out in the recommendation as soon as possible to be ready in the new year, with a particular emphasis on social inequalities, and in the interim officers seek to find compensatory savings and to consult with business traders. So,
Bill, can I just, sorry, I haven't really spoken to this, just to clarify that then, because I was in and out of this one, I'm afraid. For me, it's really important that it's incumbent on us to mitigate the loss of income, and I think that's what the amendment now says, isn't it?
yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, members. Councillor Anderson.
For.
Councillor Carubia.
Councillor Carubia, for.
Councillor Cleary.
Against.
Councillor Clements.
Councillor Clements, for.
Councillor Gilchrist.
4.
Councillor Green.
4.
Councillor Gray.
4.
Councillor Hodson.
4.
Councillor Leech.
4.
Councillor McManus.
4.
Councillor McLaughlin.
4.
Councillor Nolan.
4.
Councillor Rennie.
Councillor Rennie 4.
Councillor Spriggs.
4.
Councillor Stuart.
Councillor Stuart 4.
Councillor Usher.
Cllr Usher 4.
And Councillor Williamson.
Councillor Williamson 4.
Thank you, members. Chair, that's clearly carried.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I want to thank you again for that. I thought that was a good discussion, and there was an appreciation, and very important to me, I suppose, with my old finance hat on. It's really important that we recognise that any sort of savings that we're proposing here, or certainly the decision not to bring in an income stream, we have to therefore find elsewhere, and I know that that's what we've bought into tonight, so thank you for that. I'm back on the big screen now, I'm to and froing. I am just going to check the next item on our agenda then is I'm going to be bringing sharing, because we have, excuse me while I find my glasses now. Oh, what nice. We have the 2 budget reports, so Chair, are you going to...
Councillor Williamson.
Yeah.
You've actually missed out appointments
An
to
item on the agenda, appointment of subcommittee members.
There we go. Right.
Number
Excuse
8.
me, everyone. Yes, indeed. So could we have which officer speaking to this, please?
That's me, Chair.
Of course. If you could speak to that then, please.
Of course, Chair. I didn't know whether you wanted to leave this to the end. Chair, there are the standing subcommittees to be established by Policy and Resources as the parent committee, one of which is currently outside of political balance. So that is the Senior Officer Appointments and Staffing Subcommittee. So we're looking for nominations for that. Then also the Local Plan Subcommittee, the Finance Subcommittee and the Shareholder Board. The Local Plan Subcommittee is 5 or more members, and I recognise that there's been a discussion about whether that should be also taken out of political balance so it reflects the Local Plan Member Working Group. If that were the case, it will be a referral back to full council for what is in effect a unanimous vote. The Finance Subcommittee is 5 or more members, and the Shareholder Board 3 or more members. So, committee, if I could ask you to confirm that those are the numbers that you want, and then either make appointments this evening or ask for nominations from the relevant groups to be forwarded to me, Chair.
Thank you, Phil. Councillor Leech, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just really wanted to bring to members' attention really that the Local Plan Members Advisory Group have been working very closely, and it's an all-party representation, and the local plan is obviously an all-council decision, and therefore I feel that all parties should continue to be included. But if we stick to proportionality with this, it would exclude 2 parties. So I have been in discussion with Film Court, as he suggested, in terms of whether we could take this out of proportionality so we can continue in the same vein as we have done previously in terms of an all members discussions around this.
Okay. No, just bear with me. Apologies, I can't seem to get... Can you hear me? I can't actually get the screen up in front of me. Can people hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
It's
Councillor Williamson,
one
you
of those
have
nights, isn't it? I do. I can see them now. It's just one of those nights. IT. I've got Councillor Cleary and Councillor Carubia, and I didn't see which order they went up in because I couldn't get them. So.
Can I just point out, Chair, that Councillor Gilchrist and myself have both made comments in the chat box that are in agreement with Anita's suggestion.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Cleary?
Thanks. Well, I think Chris jumped the queue earlier, so I'll jump at this time.
Okay.
That's okay. It's just a brief comment, just to thank Anita for her suggestion, and I'd be very happy to second that if appropriate, and if we could proceed on that basis. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Carubia?
Yeah, thanks, Janette. I was just going to ask, is that something we could put forward and vote on here in this policy group, or does that have to go to full council? That was all.
Bill?
Councillor Carubia, it's something that has to go to full council. So it will be a straight request from P&R to next ordinary council.
Okay, thank you.
So we're too late for the 19th, but it will go to the next one.
Okay.
Yes.
Can I just get clarification, Phil? We will still need a seconder, though, won't we, for my suggestion here to take it to full council? Is that not correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm happy to second that.
Yeah, I'm happy to second it too.
I've put hand up, if I may.
Yes.
Could I ask about the time between now and the council meeting this goes to? Can arrangements be made so that, notwithstanding the membership, those members who might be excluded are enabled and entitled to take part in the meeting somehow?
I can address that, Chair, which is that this is a committee that will not actually meet very often, and if it did need to meet, then obviously all of those voices could be invited by the chair of the subcommittee to come forward, and obviously in the meantime, what was an advisory group and now a working group will continue as was. So all members who were party to that meeting will continue to be so.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Phil.
All agreed.
Agreed. Thank you, everyone. Moving on with committee's approval, I'd like to take items 9 and 10 together. I think that they fit naturally together. I am mindful that it's gone 9 o'clock. Whilst I don't want to diminish the quality or length of the debate, I don't think there will be a problem taking both of the budget reports together. Is that all right? I guess that's all right. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Chair?
Just before that starts, Chair, if I may, given the time, before these issues are over, you're going to hit the guillotine. So it either has to be done that way or the meeting can decide now to continue regardless.
Let's crack on. Let's crack on regardless, Janette.
Yeah, I agree that we move on regardless.
I do. And then I'll put a plea out then that we are, I think, in terms of speaking, I think if we can keep our comments brief but of high quality, shall I say, mindful of the subject matter that we're now going to discuss. So, Chair, I'm going to bring you in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I will take the two reports together. The first report is the COVID position statement for this year 2021 and next year 21-22. There's two recommendations in this report. The first one is a formal recommendation to actually recommend to full council to agree the additional funds that we've received as a result of COVID emergency from the government and the expenditure that we've made on those funds. We will fully spend those or we will return them back to the government if we haven't spent them. And the second recommendation is to ask for the committee's approval to apply for a capitalisation directive, or to ask MHCLG to apply to the Treasury, HM Treasury on our behalf for a capitalisation directive to offset the immediate forecast overspend as a direct and indirect result of COVID. So I'm just going to take the committee through some of the main points in the report really to highlight some of the main areas. So Section 5 really just refers to the first recommendation, which is the additional funding that the council has received as a result of the COVID emergency. There is a table in there that lists the funding by each category of funding. Some we have received and used for our own purposes, and some we've actually had to passport over to third parties and pay it straight out. There is an update to this table, so we have actually received additional just over £4 million since the report was written, but that can, when we go to Policy and Resources Committee in November, I will provide an update in that committee with that additional funding, and that can go to full council after this time. So the whole section really in Section 5, just as I said, it gives the value of the funding received, and then there's quite a large section there which I won't go through at all. It just provides a bit of information on each type of the funding that we've received as well. It gives the national context and also the Wirral context. So the second recommendation relevant to the capitalisation directive, Section 6 really just describes the budget position for this year, for 2021, and some of the things that it's actually made up of as a result of the overspend, which in the report is 22 million. So there's 3 items where this is actually made up of the overspend. So there are unachievable savings that we had in this year's budget that we are not now able to achieve as an indirect result and a direct result of COVID and prevention from us doing that. There are some income losses, so we are able to claim some income losses back from government as part of their compensation scheme, but we are not able to claim all the losses back, so there are some income losses contributing to that overspend. And in terms of the government funding that we've received for our COVID emergency, for the direct expenditure on COVID emergency, we are overspending slightly on that as well. So as I said, £22 million overspend forecast for this year. We must take action to deal with that overspend and to try and bring this back into a balanced budget. If we can't or we are unable to do that, that means that our expenditure exceeds our funding, which may result in me having to issue a Section 114 statement. So one of the ways that we can actually mitigate that is to apply and request permission from MHCLG to apply on our behalf to HM Treasury for a capitalisation directive. What this actually means is that we would borrow from PWLB, the Public Works Loan Board, to offset all the deficit as in relation to COVID, and then we will repay that over a number of years. As yet, we don't know how long that repayment would take place, and that's a discussion we would have to have with MHCLG. There would be a cost implication of that, because we'd have to borrow and there would be borrowing costs, but obviously the longer we can pay that back over, the less cost that would be. The capitalisation directive, MHCLG have said, comes with specific conditions. So they have asked the LGA to provide some we have asked the LGA to provide some external validation on our behalf. So we have to submit quite a lot of information to MHCLG to evidence the fact that we can't mitigate this budget gap. And we have engaged LGA, and they have started work on our behalf to look at some of those documents that we've provided already to them to try and validate that to make sure it's robust. One of the things MHCLG, which I alluded to earlier, have told us in no uncertain terms really that we must try and do everything possible to mitigate the gap before we apply for capitalisation directive. That includes things like drawing down all the usable reserves we have, evidencing all the pressures and growth that we have and whether we still actually need those now that we put in for this year, making sure that all the savings we have rated as unachievable actually will be achieved, or we can actually achieve some of those, and having an assessment of all the non-statutory services to determine whether they are providing beneficial outcomes, and if they're not, to suggest some proposals for ceasing those or reducing those or reviewing them so that they actually can provide beneficial outcomes. So they have told us that we cannot put off difficult decisions, and the rest of this report really just identifies some of the things that we are doing to try and mitigate that. So I mentioned that the deficit for this year is 22 million. In the report it also refers to a deficit for next year, an overspend of 45 million. This was at a point in time at Q1. This is actually increasing as we speak at the moment because there are some additional pressures resulting from that deficit. We've had some more information on children's social care. That is increasing. We've had additional costs of special education transport as a result of social distancing. There is additional income from sales fees and charges that will be experiencing next year that we won't be able to recoup, and also there is some additional demand within adult social care as well. So that overspend now for next year, or that forecast deficit, could be as much as 60 million, but we are doing some work now to try and quantify that and ensure it's robust. So just in terms of the budget deficit mitigation, so in the report I do go into quite a bit of detail about what mitigations we have in place to try and offset the budget. We are doing some immediate actions at the moment to try and get savings. As I said, we are having a look at all the growth items we put in last year to see whether they're still needed. And also there are actually some savings that are arising from COVID-19. Where buildings are remaining closed, and also staff are not moving around the borough, so things like transport costs, mileage costs, there's some office costs as well there. We have done a full reserves review. We don't have that many reserves actually, but we have gone through all our earmark reserves to see whether there's any that we can actually utilise in terms of putting those forward as part of those savings, and we have been able to identify some of those. Just in terms of the proposals, I mean, the next report on the agenda talks about the process and the proposals that will come through to the committees for discussion. So most of the proposals actually relate to very short, immediate term savings that we have to generate for this year and next year. Alongside that, though, we are mindful that we need a longer, longer term financial sustainability programme. So we are twin tracking the immediate savings and proposals with more longer range proposals, longer term proposals. And just to highlight this, on page 64, there's a list there of the things that we're actually looking at. So we are looking at the whole of the back office services. We are doing a full review of social care commissioning services. We're looking at a whole council prevention strategy. We're looking at a zero-based budgeting and outcomes-based budgeting exercise, looking at staffing, for the whole council as well. We are looking at all the assets, and we are compiling an return on investment modelling system to make sure that any income that we generate and investment that we put into services can actually provide a return on investment. So just in terms of that first report, Chair, there are those two recommendations in there. I can move straight on to the second report now, unless anybody's got any specific questions on that.
Probably best that you move on to the second one, Chair, and then we can take them all at the end. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. So there is a bit of crossover, I think it's fair to say, with the first and the second report, and that was done on purpose, really, just to identify and emphasise the work that needs to be done in terms of mitigating the budget gap. So the second report is more concerned with the process that will happen to set a balanced budget for next year, 21-22, within the new committee system. It is a transition year, so the process is unusual for this year in the sense that since June and through the summer, the officers have actually been working on a suite of savings proposals that they will present to each of the committees during October and November for the committees to consider and discuss and debate. What would normally happen is the committees would do this themselves and come up with the ideas and the savings proposals, and if there's time we would definitely encourage the individual committees to put their own proposals forward so that officers can look at those. But as I say, the timing as it is at the moment, officers have actually done this and they will present the proposals into the committees. So I just included some information in the report really of the ways that councils can set a balanced budget. So there's an offset obviously between funding and expenditure. There is the main majority of the funding that we actually get is from council tax. There is business rates and also grants that also subsidise our funding, and sales fees and charges, which we've already heard about this evening. In terms of the expenditure, one of the key facets of zero-based and outcomes-based budgeting is to ensure that our resources are aligned to our strategic priorities. and we have 5 themes which are being reviewed at the moment, but they have 5 themes that are in the Wirral plan that was set at April this year. So there is potential to review all of the resources, the financial resources that we put in into the Wirral plan, to make sure that we are aligning those resources specifically to achieving our priorities and outcomes. There's a little section in the report about the comprehensive spending review. It's quite difficult for us to plan at the moment, although the comprehensive spending review, the funding agreement, doesn't come out from government until December. This is known. It does come out every December, but over the past 2 years we've had a 1-year funding settlement, whereas previously we'd have 4 years, so it makes it a bit more difficult to plan. And then that will actually impact on consultation. So the timetable for the committees to review all the proposals will be during, as I say, during October and November. And then the process then is that they will feedback all sort of discussions on those to Policy and Resources Committee, which I suspect will be on the 6th of January. And the Policy and Resources Committee there will recommend proposals to go out for budget consultation. That's later than we normally do. It will still leave around about 4 weeks for consultation, which is adequate, but it is later than we normally would do that. And that's because members have asked that budget consultation doesn't take place until the funding settlement from the government is known, because that may be more favourable to our budget gap. So the report just details the process that will take, some of the things that we are doing at the moment in terms of looking at the savings, some of the categories of those savings as well, and just highlights some of that longer term planning process that I mentioned before. So the recommendation is in this report is just to note the report and note the process for the balance in the budget for 21-22 under the committee system in this transition year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Chair. I can see a few hands up. So Councillor Gilchrist and Councillor Anderson. I think Councillor Anderson's up first. So.
All right.
Thank you, Chair. There was a number of questions I wanted to ask, but in the interest of time, I'll truncate it. My biggest concern on this is I'm quite concerned really that committee chairs and the spokes haven't had their individual committee budget yet, and thanks, Chair, I've seen your email this morning to say that they will be published. But just a question for tonight is, can you confirm that these budget allocations will include the committee's remit of the budget, what deficits are there, and what potential income generation we have, and will that be broken down into statutory and non-statutory elements? And just on that, you mentioned about the capitalisation directive and that how you had to show DCLG, you considered all options, especially on the non-statutory route. So if you're showing them all options that you've considered them, does that mean that potentially we're going to look at put options forward for every single cuts or elimination of every non-single statutory service? And if that goes to the committees, that will take quite a bit of time, quite a bit of debate and quite a bit of discussion. So correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I hope that wouldn't be the case. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just through you to come back on a couple of those questions there. So, yeah, Councillor Anderson, I can confirm that in each of the committee reports, so each of the individual committees, there will be a budget report on the agenda. It will be a generic report along the lines of what I've just mentioned in terms of the process. There'll be no proposals in the report, as those will be discussed in private by the committees because they're not all fully formed as yet. But I will make sure that the budgets for each of the individual committees are contained in those reports. I will be able to let you know what the deficit is for those individual committees. That may not be before they are published. The budgets will be available before they are published. I'll try my best to get the deficits. It is quite a tricky thing to do at the moment. I'm not entirely sure that we'll be able to split it between statutory and non-statutory and income, but I will try my very best to get that information for you before the committees actually meet. We do have a few issues. Our system is very old. It's very spreadsheet based, and it's quite difficult to extract the information out of the system. It takes a lot of time, a lot of manual effort. We are changing the system, so it will be better. Just in terms of your second question, which was about putting all savings proposals up. Yes, I mean, in theory, we have asked officers to consider all non-statutory services and to put those forward as savings proposals. Some of them will be counterproductive. So I mentioned in the report that there is a medium to long-term plan. So we need to demonstrate to MHCLG that we have got a financial sustainable plan, robust plan, to mitigate any future losses. So they won't give us a capitalisation directive until we can demonstrate to them that this won't happen again, and that any future losses can be mitigated, and we have got longer term proposals and programmes in place. And obviously to enable those to be delivered, we need staff to deliver those. So I could ask officers to put up all non-statutory services for savings. If the committee took those, what that would mean is that we would have to then employ external organisations to come in and deliver those savings for us. So not all of the non-stat services will be put forward to the committees for those reasons.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Gilchrist.
Well, I think members, and I'm not sure if you're able to see it, I put a note in the chat, and I think there are some members who can recall the 1980s and the 1990s and the difficulties we had then. And what I've put in the chat is, in 40 years of public service, I've never found such a bleak outlook. I accept the formal approach to the ministry, but I'm not in the business of undoing the fabric that underpins our communities. I'm cautious about decisions on services that will, because of short-term concerns and fears, lead to damaging decisions. And I think as members, we probably all will feel that is what we have to do to try and save as much as we can. And I know that the Prime Minister believes that things will be much better and he'll be at his party conference next year. I'm not making light of that. I have a terrible feeling that it's going to take several years of our economy and local services to adjust to COVID, and that government has to plan for that, and that the Local Government Association and ourselves has to work together to make sure we can keep as much as we can going. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Gilchrist. Councillor Green, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Janette. I agree with much of what Councillor Gilchrist has said there, that the report that Chair's put forward is very bleak. I do need, and we are reaching some sort of denouement, if you will. I mean, I do, and I'm not on the audit committee anymore, as Mr. McCourt knows, but when I was chairing the audit committee, we were told regularly that the use of one-offs will lead to subsequent issues and problems. And I think, to be fair, Chair and the council tried to, with their medium-term financial strategy, and yourself, I think, as the cabinet member responsible for finance, were putting in place plans that would stop our reliance on one-offs. So I do think it's I think this is a time where we need to look quite deeply at putting the budget on a solid footing again. I know that our external auditors have criticised us, as I say, over the last couple of years, or certainly warned us over the last couple of years. And I think they have a role in monitoring that we are doing everything we can in order to run a sound budget. So I think we do need to bear that in mind. I think the capitalisation is essential in order to take us through this phase and prepare us for following years. So would clearly support that. I would just point out last time we used capitalisation for that sort of thing. I was roundly criticised by one of your predecessors, Janette, who clearly wasn't looking at yourself. But I was kind of roundly criticised for doing that. So yes, we agree with the capitalisation. We agree that we need to look at how we deliver outcomes, and that's going to be the most important things. And you know, like Phil, Councillor Gilchrist has pointed out, you know, local authorities are here for a real purpose, and what it does and how it serves our communities and so on, and binds our civic society together is vitally important. And I think that is one of the concerns that I have, Chairman, and through you to share, that what I don't see at the moment is and I think it would be useful to have that clear flow diagram about what decisions have to be taken when, and how that then works through the system at each point. I think the point that Tom has made is essential. How can we expect committees to make sensible decisions around some of these things if they don't know what the deficit is right now, for instance, so they don't know what the services are doing right now? That has to be addressed. And I also think that I haven't seen the 5, 10 or 15. That's clearly something that started earlier. But doing 5, 10 and 15 without knowing what the final settlement is incredibly dangerous. I mean, incredibly dangerous. It can really unsettle our staff. It can unsettle service users. It can unsettle a whole range of people. And once that genie is out the bottle, it's very difficult, I think, to put it back in again. So I think we need to be robust. We need to challenge, but we need to be careful that we're not setting up a straw person that everyone's going for, when in reality the amount that we do need to say, even the amount of transformation that we have to do, is not as radical or as damaging as might appear. It is a very serious situation, and I'm sure working together with goodwill on all sides, we'll find a way through it. But I do hope that we don't for want of caution, and I can understand why any director of finance would want to be prudent and cautious, we don't over threaten services, staff, etc. Because I think there's a danger that this sort of thing could go too far, and when the settlement comes, and when we've, you know, the capitalisation and so on, I think the situation could be different, and we've already set hers running that we'll never get back. So I think we need to be pretty careful and cautious around that. As I say, it is an incredibly difficult situation. No one saw this coming. Obviously, I think the resources that we've received from the government in year, over 100 million from what I can tell, has been substantial. I think our issue is going to be, what does that mean post-COVID in terms of some of the services and support that we have to offer going forward in terms of into the next 2-3 years? As I say, we clearly here to work with all parties in order to address that and maintain that civic underpinning that Phil refers to. So yeah, very difficult. But you know, I think if we all work together through this, there will be a way through.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Just before I come back to, well, I think that was more a comment than questions there, so I might move on to Councillor Spriggs. But just before I do, I just need to pick you up on something you said there, Councillor Green, when you said that we need to get the budget back on a sound footing. I think I know what you meant, but the budget was on a sound footing until COVID, so it's really heartbreaking to see the position that we're in now, you know, as a result of, as directly or indirectly, of COVID. So, but you're right, it's absolutely crucial that we do all work together now. This is really serious, the most serious that I've seen in the 3 years I've been involved in the budget. Can't comment on my predecessor. I don't know which one you're talking about. So I'll just right. Well, I'm certainly not going to comment on that anyway. I've seen that Councillor Spriggs' hand is up.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. Yeah, I think I just wanted to make a few brief comments on the bigger picture, if I may. You know, it was only back in March that, according to the Institute for Government, the Chancellor was saying it was a matter of whatever it takes to get us through what we've all saying, what we're all agreeing is an unprecedented situation that we find ourselves in. Unfortunately, I'm very worried about a lot of the information that's coming through. The possibility of the loss of 250,000 jobs this autumn should obviously be just one more of the many indications that this is, you know, an unprecedented, as I said, situation for us all. It is good to hear everybody acknowledging that the way that we move forward, after 10 years of austerity as well, by the way, is to come together and work together and remember the importance of local authorities and the role that we have to play in doing everything we can to support civic society going forward, because let's be under no illusions, you know, these are massive challenges none of us will have ever had to face. I'm very concerned about the viability test that the Chancellor's brought in, because potentially, you know, it's going to leave millions to sink or swim. There's a real feeling of anger amongst a very important sector that's in our city region, which is the hospitality and the visitor economy sector and the cultural sector. You know, the cultural sector is worth £112 billion a year to this economy, and we know quite a number of businesses have gone under. They're being left. We're going to have to mesh all of this understanding together. We're going to have to go into new ways of working together. We're going to have to start to probably reassess the role of local authority, and the local authority role here on the Wirral will have to be, I would argue, even more interventionist than it has been for a long time, because people are going to be needing that kind of support. So, you know, whilst we're talking about setting realistic budgets and talking about, you know, making sure that every penny is well spent, we also need desperately to raise our voices back to national government to say, remember what you said, Rishi Sunak, in March, whatever it takes. Well, we're coming back to you to say we need that even more, I think, as we look forward. So, you know, I'm just bringing in that bigger picture. I haven't spoken at all this evening. I haven't spoken for very long, but yeah, this is crucial that we get it right and that we work together. And that's all I wanted to say. It's more of a statement than a question. Thanks, John.
Appreciated. Thank you, Councillor Spriggs. Just on that point, really, you know, a lot of people have said to me that most other councils are in this situation, and for me, that's firstly no comfort, because it's tragic that local authorities up and down the country are at crisis points at a time when our residents need us the most. And I did say in my acceptance speech, my speech on last Monday, about the role of the council is to wrap its arms around our residents, and that for me is my guiding force. So we are in the same boat as most other local authorities, and I have been meeting with the combined authority leaders, and we are all united in our voice and our intention to make representations to central governments to help us, because we can't do this on our own, and we can't do things on the cheap when our residents need us so much. So that's just my two penneth worth for tonight. I don't actually see any other hands up, but I'm sure someone's going to correct me on that one. No? Okay. then I think we have covered both of those reports.
Yeah, I think we have to agree the capitalisation. Yeah. Chair, do you want to come in on that? Or Phil?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Yeah, yes, it was just in terms of the recommendations. I think the first one is that if the Policy and Resources Committee can recommend to full council that we approve a change in the budget, and then the second recommendation is that the Policy and Resources Committee approve that we can apply for a capitalisation directive from MHCLG. The third recommendation, sorry, Chair, was just to note the second report.
Yes. Okay. Do I have a mover and a seconder for that, please?
I'm happy to move that, Chair.
Happy to second it, Chair.
Thank you. I haven't heard anyone speak against that, so can we take this, that we have full agreement on that?
I just wonder, Chair, sorry and all that, but given that there are conditions attached to the capitalisation about what we have to do and so on and so forth, it might just be worthwhile having, and it is quite important stuff, it might just be worth going around having a proper vote, a pucker vote on it.
Happy to do that, Phil.
Certainly, Chair.
Can I just say that if there's no assent to any of it, is there any point in doing that?
I don't personally think we need one because we haven't had anyone who's disagreed. So,
if I may, Chair, I think the spirit of assent is that if a member asks for a vote, then you go to a vote.
Okay, thank you.
So, thank you, members. Councillor Anderson.
For.
Councillor Carubia.
Councillor Carubia, 4.
Councillor Cleary.
4.
Councillor Clements. Councillor Clements.
4. Sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Gilchrist.
4.
Councillor Green.
4.
Councillor Gray.
4.
Councillor Hodson.
4.
Councillor Leech.
Councillor Leech, 4.
Councillor McManus.
Councillor McManus, 4.
Councillor McLaughlin.
4.
Councillor Nolan.
4.
Councillor Rennie.
Councillor Lesley Rennie, 4.
Councillor Spriggs.
4.
Councillor Stuart.
Councillor Paul Stewart, 4.
Cllr Usher.
Cllr Usher, 4.
And Councillor Williamson.
Councillor Williamson, 4.
Thank you, members. That's unanimous.
Thank you, everyone.
There you go, Jeff. Now we're all in it together.
We've all had our hands dipped in the blood, Yvonne.
Okay, if I can move on, we have 2 more items left to go through. So item 11 shares this year again. This is the budget and performance monitoring report.
It is, Chair, thank you. So just this report we put on the agenda, it's the intention to bring forward to Policy and Resources Committee on a quarterly basis information on internal performance, internal and external performance within the council. There will be a quarterly budget report that comes as part of normal budget monitoring, but there's also several areas of performance that we could report on as well. In the report, I've actually included an appendices in there which relates to the COVID dashboard. So we produce a dashboard at the moment specifically for to report on the implications of COVID and some of the performance indicators as a result of COVID. And rather than officers actually providing some performance information for the committee, we thought it would be more beneficial if the committee would like to come up with their own areas as to what they might find actually beneficial to hear in terms of what could be in a dashboard that we could provide on a quarterly basis, and what information would be of interest to members. So I'm not intending to go through the appendices, Chair. That is just for illustration to kind of give you an insight into the information that we do provide. and indeed that we could provide, and there's quite, as you can see, there's quite a lot. There's probably over a couple of hundred items in there. So the recommendation is that I can convene a workshop with Policy and Resources Committee with yourselves to actually decide what would be of most benefit to yourselves to come back on a quarterly basis, and I can do that before the next committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I don't see any hands up. I think that's a relatively straightforward recommendation to agree. So is everyone in agreement with that? Yes. No one has indicated otherwise. Phil, is that okay?
Sorry. Yes, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have one item remaining, which is Section C, Work Programme Overview and Scrutiny. Is that, who's speaking to that, please?
So that's Steve and I, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
I'll introduce. Steve can answer any questions, but essentially it's an outline of the forward plan of key decisions for P&R, plus any other pieces of work that are carried forward. This is a regular item on all of the committees, and clearly those that have a greater relationship with the carryover of work from overview and scrutiny as it previously existed will have more in-depth pieces of work. You as P&R have more key decisions and things being recommended to you. So it's simply there for noting and comment. And clearly we're happy to pick up any conversations outside of this if members wish.
Okay, thank you. I don't see anybody that wants to speak to this, so I think we can agree, or we can agree to note that report. Yeah, no one's indicated otherwise, Phil.
Happy with that,
Okay.
Chair?
Thank you. That brings us to the end of this first P&R under the new system. I would just like to say thank you to everyone. Thank you to the members of the public, if anyone's still with us. It's been nearly 4 hours. I think the members have conducted themselves in a way that's really, good to behold. It's been a long meeting. We've all stayed focused and participated. So I want to thank everyone for their contributions tonight and for the points that they've raised. And I think it just remains for me to say thank you very much. It's been a long evening. I won't keep you any further. Thank you to the officers as well for your detailed reports.